And that's when I started belonging to the camp of the self is actually an illusion. That which is the commander of all of those doesn't really exist.
I'm Luke Story. For the past 22 years, I've been relentlessly committed to my deepest passion, designing the ultimate lifestyle based on the most powerful principles of spirituality, health, psychology, and personal development. The Lifestylist Podcast is a show dedicated to sharing my discoveries and the experts behind them with you. As listeners of this show will no doubt know, I'm a huge fan of being in nature as much as possible. Even though I live in the city, I'm outdoors and in the sun as much as I possibly can. As a result, I really have to take care of my skin. Well, I don't have to do anything. If I wanted to prematurely age, I guess I could not do much. But the fact is, I get a lot of sun. I'm outdoors in the wind, hot, cold, all the time, as much as humanly possible. So I really need great skincare products. And that's where our sponsor, Osea, comes in. These guys make products that are sustainably packaged, non-toxic, cruelty-free, vegan, and made with love in California. And if you're looking to help reveal and illuminate your natural radiance and protect your skin from damage, whether you're looking for hydration, oil balancing, anti-aging, or blemish solutions, Osea is the brand you want. You can find them at oseamalibu.com/thelifestylist. That's oseamalibu.com/thelifestylist. Each product is infused with sustainably sourced organic Patagonian seaweed and active botanicals that create a nutrient and mineral-rich bioavailable base. And that bioavailable base is really important. You don't want beauty and skincare products that sit on top of your skin. You want it to soak in and do what nature intended it to do. And Osea products do just that. Osea stands for the elements of wellness: ocean, sun, earth, and atmosphere. And that fits perfectly into the Lifestylist lifestyle. So again, go to oseamalibu.com/thelifestylist. That's oseamalibu.com/thelifestylist for 10% off your first purchase of $50 or more, and free shipping on U.S. orders of $75 or over, and free samples with every order. Check it out. Yo, I am super pumped to share with you beekeepersnaturals.com. Now, if you heard episode 175 with founder and CEO Carly Stein, you know exactly what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about are the highest quality bee products in the world from Beekeepers Naturals. Now, I've been using bee products for a long time. Back in the 90s, I was rocking like the bee pollen and using kind of gourmet honey over the years and things like that. But until that interview, honestly, I had no idea of the superpowers and the variety of different bee products. So not only do these guys make the cleanest, most organic, most potent bee products, they also have the widest variety of products. So whether it's propolis, which helps you with the immune system, soothing scratchy throats, it's really potent stuff, or the bee pollen, which is a superfood with vitamins and nutrients and gives you energy. It has amino acids and protein, whether it's the raw honey, the royal jelly. They even have a tonic for your brain. I mean, they have a lot of great products over there. So if you're not hip to the power of bee products as a superfood, I want to highly recommend that you get over to beekeepersnaturals.com. And honestly, if you want to just learn all about bees in the industry and how it's done right for ecology and for the environment, definitely go back and listen to episode 175. It's a great episode, and the founder, Carly, is just brilliant, and she's running a really great operation over there. So I'm very happy to support them on the show. And like all the stuff I always talk about, I use them every day. In fact, I use it too much because I run out of it. Like when I interviewed her, I was like, so I do like a couple tablespoons of the bee powered, which is the really potent one that combines all of the superfoods in the hive into one product. And she's like, dude, the dose for that is half a teaspoon once a day. You're tripping. But, I'm hardcore because it just tastes delicious and it gives you like instant energy. So definitely get over to beekeepersnaturals.com. When you're there, if you enter the code LIFESTYLIST, that's one word, LIFESTYLIST, you'll save 15% off your order. So go to beekeepersnaturals.com, enter the code LIFESTYLIST.
Welcome to another insanely outlandish and inspiring conversation on the Lifestylist Podcast. Today's show is the Cosmic MD Returns, Dissolving the Ego, Ketamine Therapy, and the Core of Consciousness with none other than Dr. Ted Achacoso, who's a second-time guest on the show. He's also the founding pioneer of health optimization, medicine, and practice, and one of the most inspiring human beings I have ever had the pleasure of speaking to. After the conclusion of this conversation, which goes on for quite a while, I might add, you'll definitely want to go back and check out his first appearance, episode 227. I love interviewing Dr. Ted due to the fact that he's one of the few human beings I've ever met in my life that is equally scientific and analytical and deeply intelligent on an intellectual basis, but also expansive in his exploration of consciousness and spirituality. It's very rare that I meet someone that's able to ride both those lanes with such grace and depth. Dr. Ted is one of my favorite human beings in the world, and by the end of this episode, I guarantee he's going to be yours. The first thing we talk about is a product that he created called Blue Cannatine. And as he describes it, I guarantee you're going to be wanting to get your grubby little paws on some. So I got a discount code for you. I'm just going to throw that out right now. Blue Cannatine can be found at Ted's site called troscriptions.com. That's troscriptions, T-R-O, troscriptions.com. Once you get there, look for the product Blue Cannatine and use the code Luke5 to save 5% off. What we talk about in this deeply expansive conversation includes, but is not limited to, the following topics. We discuss what the 4 ingredients in Blue Cannatine actually do for your brain and why I love them so much. That's methylene blue, nicotine, caffeine, and CBD crystals. Then we go on to talk about LSD microdosing, ketamine journeys for meditation and hacking a heartbreak, the power of oxytocin as a supplement, how he makes his own ayahuasca that doesn't make you puke, Ted's secret to nonstop happiness, the difference between the brain and the mind, the quantum field of consciousness and how to access it and manifest change in your life, how to truly create your own reality and overcome fear, even the fear of EMFs. And finally, Ted reveals what he believes to be the next big breakthrough in health. It's with great pride and gratitude that I present this fascinating, mind-expanding conversation with the Cosmic MD himself, Dr. Ted Achacoso. Really good to see you again, Dr. Ted, albeit virtually.
Yes. Well, I was in LA at the end of January for the Metabolic Health Summit.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't see you there.
No, I wasn't there. I was busy recording and up to my usual shenanigans, but it seems like everyone in the world was there except me, oddly enough.
Yeah, you were traveling everywhere in the world, Luke.
I was.
You had a good excuse. I was seeing all of the pictures on your Instagram and said, shit, I'd rather be there, which is one of the curses of suffering, right? You'd rather be where someone else is than where you are.
Oh, that's a good segue just to the beginning of this whole conversation. But before I dive off the deep end, there are a couple things I have in my notes here that I want to cover with you. The first one is people are always asking me to explain this Blue Cannatine nootropic because my tongue and teeth are often... Actually, let me make sure I have mine. I might just take one right now. Actually, I will. Dr. Scott, your partner, was kind enough to send me some of the, I guess the ones that didn't make the cut because they were an experimental flavor.
Well,
ask me, what the hell are those things? Like, why is your mouth blue? And I have a very layman's, version of the 4 ingredients in it. So just right off the bat, before I forget, I'm going to satisfy everyone's curiosity and let you, the formulator yourself, explain what's in these things.
Okay. The first is a background of the formulation, right? Since we both travel a lot, Luke, and when I travel and I land, I either have to deliver a lecture or go to important meetings or meet with patients or meet with clients. And, after flying for 22 hours, you land and you have to be on. So I created this for myself. I initially formulated it as a gum, And my friends who were asking me, what is it that I'm on whenever I'm presenting, since my tongue was blue, asked for it. And when I tried to have it made on production, but no confectioner wanted to touch it because it turned all of their equipment blue. So I had to reformulate it to what's called a trochee. A trochee is a delivery mechanism, right? Very much like, for example, there's a sublingual trochee, which is like this square piece of like candy-like material that you put under your tongue. But this one is called a buccal trochee. You insert it between your upper cheek and gum. And there's a reason for this. It's because since this is a nootropic, or something that goes to the brain, I wanted the fastest route of the closest blood vessels that are to the brain, and that would be at the roof of your mouth, right? So the ingredients are really simple. If you take a look at it, methylene blue, which turns your tongue blue, and which is the object of curiosity of many people, is actually a very old drug, and most people don't know it, but it used to be prescribed for things like bacterial infection, or viral infection, and things like that, or for urinary tract infection. And one of the findings, of course, it is a legitimate drug in a sense that it's used for a condition called methemoglobinemia, especially when you have, like, for example, carbon monoxide poisoning. That's what they inject you with, right? And the interesting part of it is that it actually revs up your mitochondria. And mitochondria, provide energy to your cells, and they will provide energy for your nerves, for your brain cells. And that's why you experience a sort of like a brightening of your experience, because your nerve cells are having more energy, right, in the process. And the way it does that is by donating electrons. Normally, there are molecules that donate electrons. There are two molecules, but the main molecule is NADH. You know that. People have been getting IV infusions of NAD, especially in LA. But another donor is methylene blue, and it can donate electrons, and it could also provide the same effect for you. So that's the methylene blue component, and that's the reason why I mainly place this, is to energize my nerve cells, right? After all, it's your nerve cells that will be functioning while you are doing your lecturing or your podcast or swimming or whatever it is that you're doing. People are actually, I intended this to be a nootropic, but people actually love it because they have more clear-headed workouts, or they're actually motivated to do things. The second component of Blue Cannatine is nicotine, right? And it's a very low dose of nicotine, and it's a synthetic bioidentical. So that only means that it is the same structure as the one you find in tobacco, but it is not derived from tobacco. And this is for legal reasons, right? We cannot use the ones that are derived from tobacco. But the ones that you find in nicotine gum, for example, that's sold at your local drugstore like CVS, that's also synthetic nicotine. Nicotine is actually already been it's called the forgotten nootropic, right? And it's really very good for your cholinergic system. And when you hear something like acetylcholine, or some of you may be taking huperzine A, for example, which is something that prevents your acetylcholine from being degraded. And when you hear acetylcholine, you can associate it with memory or memory formation, right? So it actually facilitates your workspace memory or your short-term memory. For example, someone says 1 + 1 = what? You put it in your memory, and then someone asks you later, what numbers did they ask you to add earlier on within the same session? That is short-term memory. Okay, and then long-term memory is a different, a different process. But whereafter, what I want to call, I was envious of the limitless pill, the NZT40 in the movie, and that's what I wanted to emulate for at least 3 or 4 hours. Can I get this kind of effect without any side effects? And then after that, of course, is we know very well that caffeine, is there to wake us up. And I don't need to tell you what the benefits of caffeine are. And people are actually wondering how much caffeine there is. It's actually very little. It's like 1/4 cup per trochee, because a cup of coffee that you usually take right now is around 200 milligrams. And each trochee that you have in there is only 50 milligrams, which is so upon 1/4 cup. But if you combine nicotine and caffeine together, it's just like being a synesthete. You feel a certain sharpness, of the onset, or a suddenness of decline. So I put in hemp crystals. We're legally not allowed to use the term cannabidiol. So we are using the term hemp-derived crystals because they are hemp-derived crystals. And we're also using a small amount, like 5 milligrams, right? And this is to round out the spiky feeling that you get from nicotine and from caffeine. So those are the 4 ingredients that I put together. Aside from the fact, of course, CBD has its own anti-inflammatory effects, its own anxiety-reducing effects, and so forth. So many people have been emailing me and texting me, etc., of the various things that they have been Googling around independently, during this time of pandemic. And it's actually quite interesting. Someone sent me a paper on methylene blue being able to neutralize the coronavirus together with ultraviolet light. In fact, methylene blue with ultraviolet light is being used to clean blood, right? To make them virus free. And then someone sent me, the French study on why is COVID, less prevalent among smokers, and they think it's nicotine, so they're now doing a study on it. And of course, the Israelis, are doing their CBD studies on COVID. And I said, well, we just happen to be a nootropic species with the right DNA, right? So we. And I said, we are just a nootropic. I said, we don't want any make any such claims, otherwise we'll get shut down. I said, this is something that you use to focus. If it works for you, it's perfect. For me, I couldn't stand a whole trochee. I know you can, Luke. I know you can withstand a whole trochee. I can only do 1/4 at a time. It's too strong for me. But I guess for people who are regular caffeine users, for example, they really need the entire trochee. So that's how the whole thing evolved, and now we're actually looking at trying. We've had a lot of requests for just pure methylene blue, and as you know, it's very difficult to obtain pharmaceutical grade methylene blue. I mean, don't take the ones that are intended for your fish tanks. They're very impure and they have lots of heavy metals in them. The pharmaceutical grade is the one that they actually reconstitute to produce the action that they give you when you have carbon monoxide poisoning, for example. But it comes in as powder. And now they're being studied actually for things like like Alzheimer's, for example, to rev up the brain and to see whether or not they would cause a decrease in the tangles, the neurofibrillary tangles that are produced in the brain. So we got requests for those, but I actually suspect that a lot of people were asking about those because they had a different thought in their minds about the studies that they've seen on methylene blue and SARS-CoV-2. However, this I'd like to emphasize again that this request was actually specifically coming from people for to try it out on their parents with Alzheimer's. So I don't really have any claims for this. These are being requested of us to make, and so we're trialing out soon. Probably a couple thousand pieces to send out to people who have requested this from us. So that's the whole. I didn't expect to create follow-on product to Blue Cannatine. I expected that the next product was actually going to be dispensary product for pain, right? And it would have a higher THC content, and of course, this is related to something that I do, which I do health optimization medicine, and that's balancing your hormones and nutrients. Bringing them back to the age when you were between 21 and 30 years old. However, not all. That's a gradual process. You'll get your results in about probably 3 to 9 months. But some people, will have pain, and we need to have something more immediate, than saying. And that's why. And this is the raison d'être, for creating this product line, is to be able to address those signs and symptoms that need to be immediately addressed, not on the illness level, right, but on a balancing level. For example, there are studies out there that what's related is intestinal bowel disease, for example, and migraines and chronic fatigue syndrome are all related by low endocannabinoid tone. If you give them cannabinoids, chances are that trifecta actually gets relieved from pain. So we are not after curing anything, etc. We're really just after optimizing a certain imbalance, and this time it's an imbalance of your endocannabinoid tone. So the Blue Cannatine, I went on it on a lark, really, because I just made it for me, and then it graduates to you actually wanting to use it all the time in each and every podcast that you do. So that's
It is problematic though, because when I look at the videos, it looks like I'm like missing teeth on one side. To explain it, because people like even watching now on Instagram, it's definitely noticeable, but I don't care. I mean, I look like a weirdo to a lot of people, so it's nothing new. It's kind of the story of my life, but it is just so effective, and that's why I'm so curious about it. A couple things came out of that, and then we're going to take like a complete exploration into space, just like the background of your Zoom. Last time we talked, we really talked more about health and things like that, and I know that you're an explorer of consciousness, and that's something I really want to tap into with you. But back to those 4 ingredients, I've heard talk about the methylene blue being potentiated by getting out into the sun or doing red light therapy. You mentioned its use in conjunction with UV. How does light affect the methylene blue and its effect on you?
I think it has something to do with the electrons being shuttled back and forth, right? Sunlight actually provides you with that electrons. A friend of mine famously said that the only reason we eat is for us to be able to strip electrons from food, because we can't strip it directly from the sun. And the reason we do that is, of course, to provide energy to ourselves. And I suspect that is the reason why it actually gets activated, is because then it's both, I think your listeners have already heard this. It's both an a reducer and an oxidant. A reducer would donate electrons, an oxidant will get electrons. And when it's getting electrons from the sun, it's actually exercising its oxidant function. And therefore, you have a continuous supply of electrons that can be donated to your mitochondria for your energy. So that's for me the base reason for it. Others will add more layers to that. It has aside from the redox function, it will enhance the anti-inflammatory effects. It will, enhance mitochondrial function. But on the core level, a lot of life is about redox anyway. Win some, lose some, as they say, right?
And when it comes to the D element there, obviously there's been a lot of research to support the efficacy of the different elements of the cannabis plant and different medicinal uses, et cetera. But one thing that seems to come up a lot is the absorbability or bioavailability of CBD. There are some critics of CBD oil, for example, that say that's great. It does have the constituents that are going to support your health in the various ways that people are aware of, but that if you put a dropper full of it in your mouth, that the amount that actually gets into your body,
yes,
is, like Chris Shade, Quicksilver has a liposomal delivery system for CBD.
Mm-hmm.
Would think that would be a lot more effective. Now, recently, just on a lark, I was ordering some kratom from one of the sort of dark web sites that I use that typically get shut down after a couple months. Sites and the smart drug sites, but anyway. And they said they had a little flash sale for some CBD, non-THC, non-psychoactive CBD.
Mm-hmm.
And they were having a sale. So I bought like 15 of those joints and it was amazing because it's like decaf weed. And so I, would smoke those and just kind of hang out and do my work here in the office. It drove my girlfriend crazy because they smell up the whole house. But they drive me crazy too. When I walk back in the room, it smells like the VIP room on a rap video or something. But I did notice that the effects of the CBD were much stronger. Again, not psychoactive, not high, but just relaxing and sort of anti-anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Pain-killing effect was much greater from smoking one of those CBD joints than taking even one of my really high-quality CBD products like, my friends over at Onda and the companies that I work with. They make some really, really amazing CBD products, but I found smoking it had much more of an impact. So what's your take on the absorbability or bioavailability of CBD?
Yes, thank you for actually bringing that up. And this is the reason why we're using sea crystals, right? It's because we can actually weigh them with precision, that goes into its strokey. The whole issue that I was also trying to address with Blue Cannatine, Luke, is actually when you look at California, just California alone, there is actually a confusion, or there's a dichotomy that needs to get recognized when it comes to CBD and CBD products, right? Most of the products that you're seeing there are actually geared towards consumers. You don't have to have the precise dosage that goes into, it's about, X% of this and X% of that, or it will go into food and food products or some drinks, right? And that has a very different implication from what we are doing, for example, at prescriptions, because we are more geared towards, we're a precision dose company, and therefore we're more geared towards, when we say 5 milligrams, and then you're sure that it's, there 5 milligrams plus minus the allowable tolerance for such measurement. And we know when you know that you're using, pure crystal, what the absorption is going to be, when it's going to be troche, when it's going to be in an oil, a carrier oil, and so on. So when you're using an actual oil, a cannabis oil, that's, the argument there is like, yes, that's wonderful, right? Because it will have the entourage effect with all the other terpenes in there, etc. That's just really giving you that whole effect that you talked about, which is like giving you this wonderful feeling. But when you are going to use this, for pain or for specific symptoms, not diseases, but for specific symptoms, we would rather be precise in the measurement, even if we take out some of the entourage effect. However, we're not, for example, in our succeeding products, we're not completely taking out the terpenes. In fact, we're using the crystals and we're adding their terpenes in a measured way. And this is where, the whole thing about absorption gets confused, because when you're using a natural substance, you don't know, whereas, as a grower, you probably know, well, this probably has X amount of THC, X amount of CBD, X amount of, the different types of subtypes of cannabinoids in there. We don't really know with that kind of spectrum, what your absorption is going to be, right? Unless you actually say, okay, for this particular type of cannabinoid, then we can study the absorption this way, right? And the other thing that can also be a point of confusion is that even if you're giving, say, that this amount of this particular type of CBD of cannabinoid rises, say, in your bloodstream, even if you're measuring something like that, the effect is not generally going to be the same for you as for the next person, right? Because your endocannabinoid systems might be different. I might have a better you might have better endocannabinoid tone, and therefore you will respond a lot better with just smaller amounts of it. And I may have a very low endocannabinoid tone, and I will be responding with the same dose very poorly. So so when it comes to absorption, there are these things that come to us that come in mind. If you're talking about absorption of the pure cannabinoid or type, or you're talking about the absorption of the product itself that's intended as drops, which has other cannabinoids and terpenes in it. So that gets very confusing. That's why what we're actually saying here is that even in the formulation of Blue Cannatine with the CBD itself, is that, you have to titrate your dose, right? Until you get one that is proper for you, even for those who claim it has high absorption rate, right? And for you, what you probably got with those joints, etc., is that you got the whole entourage effect nicely, and it actually fit your endocannabinoid profile. That's why you got that kind. And then, of course, you will be tempted to buy again from that, right? But this time it was harvested differently. It was grown, by someone different with a different technique and so on, and it won't work for you. So that's the issue right there. So absorption is not just a problem of absorption itself. There is the product, whether you're talking about the entire product or of just a particular system, your sensitivity to the different elements of the product itself, right? And for example, if you're taking a precision dose, whether or not it's really precision dose, whether or not it's saying exactly how much it has, right? And then you can have all the ways by which you can increase absorption. Like, Chris Shade, has a wonderful company, that produces liposomal encapsulation, so there are all of these ways to enhance absorption. But that's not the be all and end all of things. And I know that Chris will probably agree with me that you will have to titrate your use. And of course, he would be happier if you titrate higher, right? Because you'll be using more product. I'm kidding, Chris.
It's true. One thing I did notice though about the CBD joint experiment, and I did not elect to order more because I could see how it'd be very habit forming, but it definitely had deleterious effects on my lungs. I mean, I noticed I had kind of a sore throat. My lung capacity started to be affected by it. And so, I don't think for me personally, just smoking anything is a good strategy for long-term health. What are your thoughts on people that smoke weed on a regular basis in terms of brain health, lungs, et cetera? Like recreationally, like just smoke weed to get down and listen to Pink Floyd or whatever.
For me, each person has his own thing. It's not my thing, right? I have more dangerous drugs to do that with. I'm kidding. It's not my thing. But here's the thing with the studies that you see, and from my experience with my own patients and my own clients. For chronic cannabis users, for example, I have someone who I've known who've used it for 20 years. You'd see the effect on short-term memory, right? And that's actually expected. I had a conversation with the dean of the former dean of the School of Medicine, where I went to, and he was he was a psychopharmacologist, and he said, aside from being a psychiatrist, but we were talking about this in Paris, and he said, Ted, anandamide is called the bliss molecule, right? And the bliss molecule will make you feel all of this euphoria, etc. But it's also called the molecule of forgetting. Right? It's a molecule of forgetting. So it allows you to, for example, recycle old neural networks in the brain or old circuits in there, that can be forgotten, and you put in new memories in there. And so that's a trade-off that you have. And for most of his patients also that he's seen who are using this like chronically, the wake and bake on a Sunday, and this kind. And as I continue throughout the week, you notice that the phrase "where is my" is very common, pronunciation. It's like, where are my car keys, and where is my this, and where is my that? It's because of that effect on memory. I'm not judgmental about those. If you need those for pain, etc., you just have to weigh, right, the difference between what between your pain and managing your pain by other means, and basically put your cannabis use in moderation, such that it actually doesn't affect your short-term memory that much. The other thing that I've noticed for those really long-term users is that they have episodes of paranoia, right? So they develop more or less paranoid personalities. And psychopharmacologists have probably better explanation for that, but it's an observation that I've made. And you also get to be, I get to see it from people who are high sometimes, and you're trying to talk to them, etc. And suddenly you could see them getting more and more paranoid. From the euphoria to paranoia is what I call it. So, and sometimes it just bakes into your personality, but with cessation, of the use, for example, for just a few months, you see that the personality comes right back up. So it's quite interesting, right? What it does to you on chronic use. It's kind of like anything else, like metformin, for example. If you use it for a very long time, it starts poisoning your mitochondria. So even those who are metformin, I actually tell them to actually stop it for a few months and then restart it. So these are the kinds of things that you keep in mind. They have all of this. There are common pattern chronic effects, right? That go with it. So it's just for me, it's not a warning, but rather a self-observation that you have to make. The first thing that you will see is actually a decline in your memory, right? Especially your short-term memory. So of course, some people would rather forget, right? But
depends on if. See, when I was using cannabis recreationally or really medicinally, I mean, it's really like it was in my childhood and throughout my adolescence and into my 20s was really self-medication for trauma. It was like a psychotherapy kind of assisted help for myself, but it did come with the price of definitely having an impact on my memory. And I think because I was using it so young, and again, I don't want to put this into the quantum field and create this as a reality, but I have observed in the past that I've had some issues with memory that don't seem to be present in people around me that are of similar age and lifestyle, et cetera. So word to the wise there. But I was curious to get your take on that. I mean,
unless you do it deliberately, Luke, like Oh, I've forgotten you. It must be my cannabis use, but you really dislike the person.
That's a good Sorry about that email I never answered. Yeah, man, I've been smoking a lot. In pain, and I'm curious. I'm just going to I want to do a little lightning round on just a couple things I've been just dying to ask you, especially, and I'm sure our audience will derive some benefit from the answers too. But I don't get time with you very often, especially now with these travel restrictions. So I just wanted to get your take on it. One is, you mentioned pain. What's your take on, if you have any knowledge about kratom, or as people in Southeast Asia refer to it, kratom? Do you know anything about that particular substance and have any opinion?
Actually, it from my research of it, because I was hoping it would actually be researched in the United States as an opiate substitute, right? And that's why I was researching it on the basis of its action on the various types of opiate receptors. And from what I remember, it's been about 3 years now since I looked at kratom, because I have a lot of clients or children of very rich clients who are one way or the other into opiates. And I wanted to find, instead of giving them stuff like, methadone and all of these other substances, why not kratom? So I took a look, and I think I remember something about the mu opiate receptor and all of that, and it has the same it's sort of like, it's a mimic, so it will behave like an opiate and will bind to those receptors. It will give you the analgesia, or the decrease in pain, right? That you actually need, without the constipation side effects and so on. But other than that, I have not actually researched it for other things. For me, it was, what's the immediate problem that needed to get solved? With Blue Cannatine, it was my performance for the next 3 hours. With kratom, it was like all of this, very young adults who are actually hooked on opiates for some physical pain or the other. Can we attenuate their use of opiates by substituting kratom, for example? And then can we actually totally pull out their use of opiates and just use kratom for that? Because it's a natural substance. I'm sure that the body would respond to it in a different way, than with the opiates that we're currently using, right? Okay. So that's the kratom piece that I studied about 3 years ago. It's just too bad that none of the research has focused on that in the US, and who's going to study that, right? So it's sold in Thailand. That's where I actually got my initial supply of kratom, to see whether or not it would actually relieve pain, for opiate users. And I asked some of my clients to actually try it, right? So,
well, I use it.
So for now, my results on it are just anecdotal.
Yeah. Likewise, I use it periodically for pain, and I find it to be quite effective. And as someone who was previously very well addicted to opiates, I've not found it to be addictive. Although I have to give the disclaimer, I hear through the grapevine that it can be, and that people have developed dependencies on it like they would another opiate. I just personally, surprisingly almost, have not had that experience. It's only been a positive experience. But I also make sure that I'm not just, mindlessly taking it every day because it feels good or something and putting myself in harm's way. But I think it's an interesting substance because, as you indicated, it's completely natural. I mean, it doesn't even require any sort of extraction.
Yeah. Really, no extraction. Yeah.
Leaf, grind it up and eat it. And
yes.
Pain like OxyContin or something. I mean, it's pretty wild. And there are extracts of it that are that I've taken periodically that are quite a bit stronger, and do have the potential to get you pretty high if you're not careful, or that might be your goal in some cases. But even just the natural leaf is really effective for pain. And almost different strains I've noticed have a little bit of a stimulating effect, not unlike some nootropics, like a mild caffeine or like a green.
Yes.
Sort of high, which is really...
There's a red kratom, a green kratom. There are all of these things now. And they used to be sold, legally until we can't find them anymore, which is too bad, because it could be studied as a good substitute for opiates.
Yeah.
I used to give it for low back pain too. When it was legal, I used to give it for low back pain.
Yeah. Just to up Dr. Ted, it is currently legal right now in the States, and you can order it online, as I've been for a couple of years now. Yeah, the FDA's come after it pretty strongly a couple of times, but people have fought back and formed petitions and sort of revolted against that, specifically veterans and people that suffer from PTSD, chronic pain, pharmaceutical opiate dependencies, et cetera. And they have been able to push back and maintain its legality for now.
Oh, wow.
I do see waves of regulatory agencies coming after it again, because obviously it's cheap, it's not patentable.
Yes.
It could consistently get someone off fentanyl, OxyContin, street heroin, whatever. So
yeah. The last time I ever entered a store, to look for kratom here in the US, it's like, oh, we pulled it out, because the FDA came after it. So I just assumed that the FDA came after it already in a big way.
Yeah, I mean,
and then look, after kratom, you just shove some ibogaine into the person and say, "Here, deal with your pain."
All right, that brings me to the next couple things, and again, there's so many things I want to get into, but I can't. Yeah, we Instagram guy is like, "Hey, are you talking kratom?" Yes, we did, and you can watch this on IGTV afterward to go back to that. But there's a couple interesting things that have transpired since our last meeting when you came over here to the studio. I'll never forget, and I tell people this story anytime I talk about you, because I had not met you up until that point. I just seen your little bio picture when I booked you. So you knock on the door, I open the door, there you are in your black suede boots, your skinny black jeans, leather jacket, black Western shirt, bolo tie. I'm like, this guy's like the Filipino Johnny Cash. I'm like, dude's cool. We're going to get just immediately your energy, your vibe. I was like, this dude is cool. And so you walk in, and one of the first things you do is you put a couple of troches down on the table. You go, "Here, I brought you a couple of gifts." And I said, "What's that?" And you said, "Well, that one's oxytocin, and that one's ketamine." And I said, "Ketamine? What is this, a rave?" And then you explained, you said, "Oh no, it's really useful for, consciousness journeys and when you want to do some self-inquiry, meditation, et cetera." And up until that point, I didn't know about ketamine assisted therapy. I had no idea, because it wasn't really something I was investigating at that point. But I did then, use those troches of both those substances, and it was really interesting. I haven't talked to you about this since then, I don't think, although we ran into each other in London a while back. But you said, well, if you take the ketamine, it's a really good opportunity. It's like a truth serum. So if you want to ask yourself questions and really get real with yourself, it will allow you to do that and help dissolve some of your own self-deception. And if you want to have a conversation with someone else and be really transparent and get to the root of an issue and really get to the matter of truth. And so I took that into consideration. I did a couple solo, very microdose journeys, not too deep, and thought, oh, this is interesting. There's definitely an element of disassociation, which I liked, where you can get into that sort of quantum space and figure things out, work on things, have creative inspiration, et cetera. And then I took some with someone that I was dating at the time. And I thought, well, we're just going to kind of have some fun and just have a nice, easy night and share some time together. And we ended up having quite an honest conversation to the point where it led to the demise of the relationship. I think we were so honest, we thought, yeah, this really isn't working. And of course, it ended up, I'm sure, for both of us being a positive experience and all of that, and all is well. But I thought, oh man, Ted wasn't kidding. Like, you got to be careful with this shit, because the truth will prevail. So if you can, in a brief way, give us the mechanism of action or what piqued your interest about that particular substance, which, again, to someone like me, my knowledge of it was relegated into the realm of like party drugs and something I would have never even considered exploring at all.
Yeah, sure. Just a quick history for you. My first experience with ketamine was actually intravenous ketamine. And that was not by choice. I had a tonsillectomy done when I was already in third year medical school. And you know very well that a general anesthetic, the gas anesthetic, the inhaled anesthetics, they actually fuck up your memory for about 5 years, both long-term and short-term memory. And I said, no fucking way am I going under, for you to take out my tonsil. And so I opted for local, and ketamine was used as the twilight anesthetic, right? So it's a horse tranquilizer, and it was ketamine was used in the war as anesthetic by the surgeons because it could withstand the heat. It did not require any special equipment. You could drip it IV, you could use it IM, and so on. But when I was under it, I was seeing this big trocar. This is a big fat needle, being inserted in my mouth and right into my tonsil. And I said, oh, this is okay. There was some fear extinction that was going on there. And then I said, you know what? If they asked me, how I was feeling this time, I would probably tell them the truth. That this procedure fucking sucks, but my first experience of twilight anesthesia was at the time using ketamine. And then I actually got interested in it because there is a ketamine protocol, right, for the treatment of depression that is resistant to other drugs. And what I have also seen is that probably at the initial onset of a very, very heavy depression, I am one of those who would refer you to a ketamine therapist and a psychiatrist who knows how to do therapy after ketamine infusion, or they could give you ketamine troches, just like the troches that I gave you, right? And what it does is actually what's called a double negative. So it's an NMDA. It inhibits a certain receptor, right, in the inhibitory neuron of the brain. So this inhibitory neuron inhibits another, say, neuron A, right? Inhibits or says no, do not release this to neuron B. So neuron B happens to basically fire with glutamate, which is the excitatory neurotransmitter of the brain, right? Neuron A is an inhibitory neuron and says do not fire. What ketamine does is that it blocks the inhibitor. So minus is a plus. So it releases the blockage of the glutamate releasing neuron, and it makes what I call the peripheral structures of the brain more excitatory. And what does that do? If we could just do a shortcut to that, and despite the scientists probably hating this, if I could just say, well, that's the task positive network. That's the one that allows you to look outside, your sensory system, and it's the portions of the brain that are engaged where you're in the flow, right? There's a diminution of the self. Now, at the center, mostly central, like midline of the brain, would be a set of structures called the default mode network, which is considered to be the seat of the ego, right? Ego is a very loaded term. I prefer it to because in Freudian psychiatry, that's your sense of self-importance. But for me, the ego is just a self-referential system. Anything that's autobiographical, that refers to you, that allows you to be able to know what others seem to be thinking. So anything that's internal is actually processed right there. And what ketamine does is, from the way I see it, easy way of understanding that is what's called a DMN reset. It resets your DMN because it activates the part of the brain that, like the task positive network, it works opposite the DMN, right? So, for example, when I used to do medical procedures, right? When I was poking the brain, I was very focused on the task, right? And at that point, I had no self because they work basically opposite each other, right? They're counter yoked. So if one is on, the other one is off. What happens in depression is that the DMN actually is hyperactive. There's a lot of rumination and so on. And that rumination or self-referential system, this is a lot of the stories that you tell yourself, Luke. Even if it's not true, you believe it, right? Even if the stories aren't true, you believe it. And in normal conversation, you would be telling the things that you believe, not necessarily, what is there without a self owning it. The important thing is that the self is the owner of experience. It's like to experience, experience, experience. But the truth is that is just an what you call an arising out of consciousness. It's an illusion, right? It's there's no really structure there called the self, right? And when you get hurt, right? There's a saying, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional, right? And that's the difference between having a self and having no self. It's something like this. It's like, here's the temperature rising from the fever. And then the story is, fuck this. Why did I have to kiss that girl with infectious mononucleosis? So these are, that's the story. But the truth, you will carry the story, but the truth is that it's simply, a rise in temperature. So it's the self that generates the kind of story, right? And then that causes you suffering. Like, I shouldn't have done this and I shouldn't have done that. And, what it does is it's just like this ghost of a conductor that doesn't really exist, but when it's there, you get lost in it and identify yourself as the ghost, because it will pull in your thoughts, pull in your emotions, pull in your concepts, pull in your language, and then pretty soon you're concocting this story, which is so believed because it's made up by the ego, and what ketamine does is that it actually quiets this because in a way, what it does, it actually heightens the activity like psilocybin does of the outer connections, right? The more peripheral, the more external connections in the cortex, in the task positive network. That's why it's actually shut down. So your stories are, that's why it's a three stream. Your stories don't develop. And suddenly you're able to talk to each other truthfully about things. It's not like MDMA. MDMA like shoves you with these emotions of love and so on and so forth, right? It's just like all of this very it's an entactogenic, makes you tell I love you to everyone and so on. But this one is more cold. It's more clinical. It just says, okay, there's no Luke story here. It's just all of these pieces of things, and this memory says, there's something about the way this person moves that doesn't jive with me. There's there's something there's a feeling that I have that's really off and so on. So when you look at those in pieces instead of someone weaving a story around it, then suddenly you become truthful to each other. And sorry for the demise of your relationship, Luke, but that's what it does. But the one thing that I like about it is the reset that it gives you, right? When you're after it, everything is quiet. Not even, your thoughts rarely come up. What most people don't realize is that thoughts are hard to control and they should not be controlled. They should be observed. It's just like, for example, if you close your eyes and you're hearing sound, right? You cannot control where the sound is coming from, right? Or you open your eyes and you're seeing things, you cannot control where the seeing is from. It's the same with your thoughts. Unfortunately for us, we're kind of fucked because those thoughts, will of course attach with your emotions and then will hijack your attention. There's a center in the brain called the salience network, which can be hijacked. And pretty soon it's like, I'm gonna exact my revenge. I'm fucking angry. The I develops, and that's the storyteller, right? There's an I that's getting hurt. Because temporarily that becomes you, right? And that's the neuroscientific basis of, when the Buddha said, the root of all suffering is the clinging mind. And clinging actually means it's the self that's clinging to all of this. There's an identity, right? That gets developed. So when you start, the way to see whether or not your ego has come up is to ask a simple question: who is getting hurt? When there's a who there, you're sure that the ego is up. Like, who wants to exact revenge? And when you see that, that's the ego that's up there, because it wants to own, right? It's the want. I want this. I want that. I want this experience. It's called the experience collector, right? I want to experience this. I want to experience that. I want this. I want that.
We'll be right back at you after this brief but important announcement. Let's take a moment to celebrate one of my all-time favorite health and wellness brands. They're called Surthrival, and you can find them at surthrival.com. They've been in the game for about 12 years, and I discovered them 10 years ago when I met their products and their founder, Daniel Vitalis, at a health conference. I'm sure if you're a regular listener to this show, you've heard his 4 prior appearances as a guest. I've been a huge fan of Daniel's work and Surthrival products for years, and I literally use them every day. Something I really respect about this brand is the excellence in formulation, using wild and organic ingredients, and their on-point packaging in Myron glass to protect the potency of the products shipped to you directly by their staff in Maine. Everything they make is manufactured right here in the USA, and their products are really for the discerning health connoisseur, as no detail is overlooked. And right now, more than ever, we need to remain healthy and strong in this transitional time in history. And these products are going to definitely assist in doing so. Surthrival was built on the premise of self-health care, the idea that ultimately we are each responsible for our own health. And never before has that become more clear. While governments, health agencies, and medical professionals scramble to create policies and treatments for the masses, the wise amongst us, like you listeners, are busy building the strongest, healthiest, and most adaptable versions of ourselves we can. Surthrival specializes in time-tested immuno and adaptogenic formulas for modern humans. I'd recommend that you start with Surthrival's elk antler formula for total body adaptation and anabolism. Then check out the colostrum and vitamin D3 K2 combo for incredible immune fortification. They also have a fantastic reishi as well as a chaga medicinal mushroom extract for immunomodulation and physiological stress adaptation, pine pollen for restoring androgenetic balance in this xenoestrogen-polluted world, and taboo for optimal hormone balance and sexual function. And let me tell you, that stuff works, my friends. They've also got a great CBD product. Their entire product line is just fantastic. I highly recommend that you get over to surthrival.com and check out the entire product line. And while you're at it, use the code STYLE10 to save 10% off your order. That's surthrival.com, and the code is STYLE10. And now, back to the interview. Okay, this is a very important distinction to make for anyone that has a desire to have a fulfilling, productive, enjoyable life, is to be able to find that gap of separation that you speak of between the true self of consciousness, a single point of unified field consciousness, right? To step back and to be able to observe one's thoughts, one's feelings, the I, the self, the me, that is believing these stories. I mean, that right there is the answer to everything, is it not?
Yes, it's the root to all suffering, is being identified with that me, right? That's making up all of these stories. They're not even true. The self is just an illusion, right? It's there because it was placed in there by evolution. But what we have done, and we have not been helpful as a society, really, what we've done is really inserted layers on it such that we, our technologies, etc., are more towards building lots and lots stronger and stronger egos rather than lessening. And I was having a video conference with my company the other Monday, and I showed them a 2014 study of young adults who were given a choice, right, of electrocuting themselves or shocking themselves versus just staying with their thoughts for just 15 minutes, and be alone with your thoughts for 15 minutes. You could think about anything that you want, etc., etc. And shockingly, the people actually preferred to electroshock themselves rather than be left alone with their thoughts, right? I could send you the link to that study, but that's 2014. It's fucking 2020, and it's showing very, very badly during this quarantine period, right? People can't seem to be alone with their thoughts. And then because they start believing their thoughts, right? They start thinking that their true identity and their thoughts are them. And then suddenly the I, with so many cravings and aversions, starts basically taking the pilot's wheel. So that's that's a problem. And I take a look, at occasionally I do a cursory look at what's being posted on YouTube, a cursory look at what's being tweeted out, and a cursory look at Instagram, and you see, how people cannot stand being alone with their thoughts. Right now, I have an actual opportunity to meditate 5 times a day, and even it's just 20 minutes. A meditation, a sitting meditation 5 times a day, and I find it incredibly gratifying, right? And here are people, in the study, basically they'd rather electroshock themselves, rather than even if surveyed beforehand, would they rather pay not to get electrocuted, right? And they said no, they'd rather pay not to get electrocuted, but when left alone with their thoughts, they would rather electrocute themselves than do that.
I totally relate to that. My childhood and much of my early life was spent from that point of view of just, in fact, I always lived in the country in small towns when I was a kid, and I absolutely hated it because there was nothing to distract me from the inside of my mind, and the thoughts and sensations I had were so uncomfortable and painful because I had no way to contextualize experiences that I'd had as a kid, that I hated the country. And whenever I had a chance, I'd get into San Francisco. And as long as there was a lot of noise and a lot of people, then I would find inner peace. The more chaotic my outer environment was, the more inner stillness I was able to find because of that, the widespread distraction. Contrast that by life today, and more and more I can't stand to be in a city. And when I get out in the middle of nowhere, the quieter it is, the more it is in alignment with the quietude that I have within myself, and that's, as you indicated, meditation and so many of these other experiences have led me to actually crave the converse as an adult, where all I want to do is go in the middle of nowhere where there's nothing and just sit there.
Now you know why there are monks and there are places of contemplation, and why 30-day 6-week retreats are popular, right? Because it's easier to do it. But the real challenge is in real life, when rubber meets the road, when you're actually dealing with people and so on. Can you maintain that, what I call a constant perspective? It's Sam Harris, is well known in this field, and what he's said is that this is not something deep inside the brain. In fact, it's something more superficial. It's like an optical blind spot. When you're shown where your blind spot is, you will know that you have a blind spot, right? You're shown that in school, and being able to shift to your quote unquote true identity as this consciousness. In fact, he says consciousness is all you have, because it's everything that's where everything is appearing, right? And the difficult part of it is that you can't get into that consciousness from the self or from the ego, because it simply arises. Self simply arises from the ego. So you have to have a way of actually making the illusion, disappear, right? People say, I have to obliterate the self and so on. Well, that's not really the case. The self, you have to be able to witness the self as arising, because it's just another content of consciousness, much like a sound, or much like, something that you're looking at, much like a thought or emotion. It's the self that's doing that temporary integration. As there's a guy, Gary Weber, I think is his name. He says it's an ad hoc, putting together, and then you start believing that that's you, and that's what fucks us up, right?
Yeah.
But the characteristic of why I think, Luke, and I am grateful for you actually for doing these types of podcasts, is that it's my conviction that enlightenment of the human species is actually an emergency. We should wake up. I mean, I'm just going to start with the coronavirus pandemic and then really drill down into why it's necessary. Look, this is a global pandemic. I don't joke around when I say that my one of my main causes is near Earth asteroids, right? I was once stopped by a lady. I was running by the U.S. Capitol and said, "Come join our cause." And I said, "What's your cause?" He said, child labor in China. I said, "Isn't it the best cause?" I said, "No, that's not my cause." So what's your cause? I said, "Well, near Earth asteroids." And she's sort of like, "Okay." And this is like this coronavirus pandemic is like a near Earth. This is just like an asteroid that hit us. Right, but look at the way we're responding. We're responding in a very, very balkanized way. We blame each other. We begin to hate each other as groups. We don't have, as a species. We don't have that kind of awareness, a species awareness. Instead of saying, blaming each other and rushing to do this and that, there should be the part of us that. As a species, that realizing that we're only one of the species on Earth. The Earth is our only host, right? That sustains us. We're like viruses, it sustains our reproduction in a single host. So we don't have this awareness, like, where do we bring our species from here on out, right? What's our direction, right? If all we do is survival and reproduction, we're fucked. Look, we're gonna be surviving, reproducing, and then going out to another planet, and then do what again? Survive and reproduce, and then go out to another planet. If we're going to be like that, then we're doomed, right? And then you say, so what? It's that. But I don't think without a species-wide awareness of where we want to bring ourselves, right? Because we have the capacity to do so, we're fucking doomed. We're going to destroy ourselves and our planet. This is the type of consciousness that comes out on the other side of what when we're talking about eliminating suffering, right? Buddha said enlightenment is the cessation of all suffering. And suffering is actually, for me, it has a very, very simple definition, right? Suffering is preventing yourself, your true self, to identify with the illusory ego or with the self-referential system that's there, that's temporary, right? Because it's that which, on a very simple way, like, will tell you, it's a craving and avoidance, right? Or craving and aversion. It's this thing, Oh, it can go from as little as, I want that cup of tea. It's very little, but you notice that it's coming from that from that little thing. And that's a minor exercise, right? What more when you're looking at relationships? I hate that person, right? And then when we go to us as a species, we think that each of us, is special. No, it's not. We're part of this species, and we should wake up together and take a look at the effects of that. I want more. It's the ego that says, I want more profit, right? We already know, there are already studies that, in the US, after about $75,000, your happiness doesn't increase by much. anymore, right? Maybe it has increased lately, but that was a study. But so if you wake up in Adjasanti says there's a abiding enlightenment and a non-abiding one. Non-abiding one is like a flickering fluorescent lamp, right? It comes up every now and then, and the abiding one is just there's this continuous shift in knowing that your ego is not you. You have to rest in that knowing, right? Now, when you go and apply this to the 8 billion of us in this planet, just wanting more cars, wanting more fossil fuel use, wanting to pollute more, wanting more, you want, right? And, your daughter has to get the most beautiful prom dress, and that's drilled into her head, then what are we really? How, take a look. Even that, we'll get more profits if you use more child labor. We'll get more profits if we actually do human trafficking. So from the little want of wanting tea, right? That's actually the effect of having enlightenment or not being able to recognize that the self is illusory. And we already know by neuroscience, we don't even have to invoke Buddhism to do this, that it's an illusion. It resides in the default mode network, as has already been elucidated. For example, Robin Cartwright Harris, the researcher at the Imperial College of London, has shown, right, psilocybin. That's why mushroom trips, right? They actually the full-blown psilocybin, not the microdose, but the full-blown psilocybin treatment or a dose or a full-blown LSD dose actually basically just quiets or silences that self entirely, right? It silences itself entirely. So you can actually take that as an experience of what it is to be selfless, right? But then, as one author who has studied this for 20 years and took heroic doses of LSD and wrote about it. He was actually a professor of theology, of all things, right? But he said that this is called a temporary path, right? Psychedelics can only be temporary. You need to have a practice afterwards to maintain it. It's like, you don't go to the gym once to build your muscles, right? You go and constantly do it. So much as like you have a physical gym to do these things, you have a mental gym, right? In order to be able to take a look at the contents of consciousness and say, that's not you, right? That's just arising from you. The Dzogchen has, which is a spiritual practice that was actually enfolded into Buddhism, right? It says that you're like a mirror and you remain unchanged and everything is just reflected in there, right? So and that's like the self, right? If you imagine that there's this optical illusion, right, of the 4 circles with cutouts on the edges, and then when you look at it, it looks like there's a square in the middle. The self is kind of like that, right? It's an illusion. It's not what it seems to be. It's not that it's not there. It's just not what you actually own it to be. Because when it owns you, you're fucked, man. You're. And for the most part, I consider these are the steroids, right? These are the steroids of your mental building gym, right? The psychedelics. But but you still have to do the work. You still have to exercise. You have to still do that. And then when you're not on cycle, I've had bodybuilder clients, so I know they go on cycle and then they go off cycle, right? And when you're not on cycle, you still have to do the exercise, man. And some people do it through meditation. Some people have other practices, and that's why I feel that there is an emergency right now, because especially it's made acute, by our current condition of this pandemic. It just shows us how uncomfortable we are with our thoughts, and it's just looking at us. Look, just do an exercise on just examining the things that you see that are being produced on YouTube and examining what's being produced on Twitter and so on and so forth. We can't stand ourselves, right? Like, and why is that? It's because we're basically identified with the self-referential system. We're identified with the ego. And as long as we keep on doing that, we're going to destroy this habitat. Because as I said, from a simple want of a cup of tea, it will extend towards the world at large. I want more profits, and therefore I'll pollute more of the oceans, right? I'll relax more of the Environmental Protection Agency regulations, right? And look at what happens now, when we're in quarantine. The air is cleaner, all right? One of the things that I really enjoyed reading was that the vibrations of the earth are really less, such that those little seismic shakes that normally don't register are finally registering, these minor earthquakes, because the activity of humans actually increase the vibration of the earth. So we created this, and we have to ask ourselves, until when are we going to do this, and why are we doing this, right? And is there a way, what's the best way to put on the brakes on this? And the way to put on the brakes on this is, one, to experience what it is to be selfless, right? I'm not, don't ask me to be a source of your DMT or anything else. You find that yourself. But if you don't know what it is to have no self, then I would encourage you to have that experience. Even for me, even microdosing is not enough, right? Microdosing can give you that openness, feeling, etc., etc. But the ego is still very much there. You feel it there, right? So, go get an experience, or go to a meditation retreat, that will cloister you for 2 straight weeks, or, a month, or 6 weeks, etc. So you can see what it is to be alone with your thoughts, right? And you could see how people nowadays cannot be alone with their thoughts, right? Because they take that the thoughts are them, instead of something that just arises from their consciousness. And then after that, learn a form of meditation. It may be a focused meditation where you're focusing on a single object, like your breath, or an open awareness meditation where, it's like playing the xylophone when you're actually, basically taking your awareness to the various components of what's around you, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, etc., as just things that are arising. But the trick, that's really, I think, it's simple yet complex, because other people take 50 years to get it. Some people get it in an instant. Is to be able to regard thoughts and emotions, as simply the same thing as the sights and sounds that arise, in your consciousness. Why is it that you can let, a horn go by and just go blah, and then, the image of someone you hate comes back, and then suddenly you are that person that becomes that image, instead of that consciousness saying, oh, image arising. It's just like a sound that's arising. In fact, in Buddhism, thoughts are the sixth sense, right? But in science, the thing that is difficult to explain, right, is what's called the hard problem of consciousness. And in very, very simple things, people bandy that around all the time as if they know what it means. But when I ask them how to say it very simply, they don't seem to know how to express it. So I'm going to teach how to express it properly. It's like this. How is it that matter, like the brain, is able to give you subjective experience or the feeling experience? So that is the gap. That is the hard problem of consciousness, to jump from matter right, which is the brain, into the subjective feeling of experience, right? And there's a term called qualia, right? We say it's red, but your experience of red, differs from my experience of red. We just happen to agree that that falls within the same wavelength of what we call red, right? And that's the hard problem of consciousness. Now, what I'm saying here is, okay, people are working on the hard problem of consciousness. There are many models of consciousness. For me, consciousness is I define it very clinically, since I'm a clinician. And I used to be a computational neuroscientist once, but very simply, it's that which goes away when you fall asleep or when you're under anesthesia, right? So I define it by what it isn't, right? And there was a paper recently that I think a couple of weeks ago, that basically showed that from the current studies, there are structures in the brain, the DMN, again, the default mode network, and what's called the dorsal attention network, which is another network in the brain that is more on the peripheral cortex, that alternate. They maintain a balance in order to keep you conscious. Again, this is based on the newest studies, right? But I'm not even looking at that. I am looking at something that we can do now, because we already know that the self is an illusion, right? We already know where the DMN is. We know that it gives rise to the illusory self that has all our wants, our desires, and so on. Actually, what are the four attachments? Remember, in Buddhism, is actually all the wants or cravings of the self. Attachments to things that are sensate, right? Attachments to rituals, attachment to opinions, and attachment to the ego. And these were written a long time ago, right? And now we know the neuroscientific basis for the self as arising as a temporary neural network that basically temporarily integrates this experience to someone that says, "Oh, that's me," right? But that's a false me, right? It's just temporary there, creating a story or weaving a story around you. And what it does, it does serve a purpose. It serves a continuity of you being able to tell a story of who Luke's story was from childhood to now. But in truth, there is really no more of that child Luke. That's gone. It's just all in memory, and memory isn't real. Right? It's just patterns of electrical impulses that form in your brain, and they get activated. So being able to distinguish, consciousness from the emergence of the self, it means that we can already do something right now, right? Because we have techniques by which and drugs by which you could actually see how the self arises, how the illusion can be busted, how it disappears, right? And there are exercises that allow you to more and more essentially get rid of the illusion, right? You don't see the illusion anymore. And if the illusion does arise, you very quickly are able to see it. And how is that useful? For example, if you are a teenager, or your daughter wants really that really, really beautiful, $50,000 dress, or a $20,000 bag, and so on and so forth. If you just stay with it, you see that's simply a desire that's arising, right? It's not owned by anyone, right? And that's an extreme example, but you could see, but that if you just stay with your wants or your cravings, you will see that they dissipate after a while, but if you think that I really want this, and it becomes you, right? The desire becomes you, then you're actually fucked. Then you're going to max out your credit card. So the tools are very, very simple. Have you watched Duncan Trussell's Midnight Gospel yet?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's really great. Um, but one of the techniques that his mom and even Mingyur Rinpoche, right, who is a great one of the great teachers that are alive, is, it's very simple, even not without drugs, on how to just sink into your consciousness without the self. Imagine yourself as very tired at the end of the day from work, right? From work, and you just plunk yourself down in a lazy boy and exhale, just do a deep exhale. And at that moment in time, when you do a deep exhale, there is no problem in the world. There is no problem to get solved. In that brief moment, you are experiencing selflessness, right? And just imagine if that state stayed with you all the time. And the other example that they of course usually give is when you're climbing a mountain that you've always wanted to climb, right? When you reach the summit, there is this brief period where you have absolutely no desire to climb any other mountain yet. It's a brief window, and say,
it's a good one.
Oh, yeah, this is great, right? But then right after the summit, for some, it's like, a few minutes. For some, it's hours of just being there, contented. And then, yes, I'm going to climb a higher mountain next. And then you're back to the ego craving again, right? And it goes to everything else. I want to have a girlfriend. I want to have children. I want to have this. I want to have that. Want, right? Without, if you're going into that state without examining really that's the craving and whether or not you're going to act on it, then, we're as a species, we do that all the time. We're actually kind of fucked.
Well, I think something that's incredible about the work that you do is you, as you've indicated, are a scientist, and in that realm, you're working in the linear, in the mathematics, in quantifiable data. But at the same time, your personal life and perspective is based in this mysticism. And I thought that was one of the most interesting things about you as someone who has a really high IQ, which we've talked about. I know you have the humility to not brag about it, but you're a really, really smart guy on paper. Is I find that it's so fascinating that you're able to bridge those two worlds. And I experience that that's difficult for many people to do that have the propensity toward analytical thinking, and combined with a really high IQ and a really high level of intelligence, because you can't get yourself into the spiritual realm from a realm that is in a different dimension, so to speak, right? So it's like there's two different paradigms of the hard science and the math versus the realms of consciousness. And I think where many people get stuck in the idea of believing in a higher power, or in the concept of consciousness or the higher self versus the egoic, analytical, mind-based self, is that it's unprovable, right? It's like, how do you concept of God?
Yeah.
So you're caught between these worlds that are really in different dimensions. It's like trying to prove the sky to a fish. You're in a different dimension. So how do you breach that for someone who's caught in the provable, tangible, linear world of science versus a mystic who's just completely far out into the ethers and existing in the quantum field all the time?
See, if you're looking at physics right now, right? I'm lucky because for the past few years, my reading has devolved to one book a week, which is really terrible. And now, since this quarantine and everything, since I arrived last December, I've been reading 1 to 2 books a day, which is really fantastic. So I've been able to catch up on really lots of books and lots of journals and so on. And I had an incredible experience in late January where I was actually laughing for 24 hours, and it's one of those classified as an enlightenment experience. And I am writing about that, but I was looking back at what prompted that experience. Right, it was a 24-hour laughing fit, and I was Doug Chen, as I said, as a spiritual practice, right, has this pointing out instructions where the master or the teacher actually points out to you the true nature of mind, right? And there was a challenge that came from a student of mine that said, "Okay, can you teach this to people who are scientific and rational, right? How do you teach that?" So I said, "Can there be scientific pointing out instructions?" Right? I'm calling those TED Chen. So after TED, but anyway, the first one that I was reading about was actually, and you're asking for the bridge, right? Is looking at the state of physics where it is right now. Now, if you are not like Eric Weinstein, who thinks that the string theory, is probably made up. Well, we make up things anyway in order to secure continued funding for physics. Then if you take a look at the models right now, you see that there's really only one missing ingredient. The missing ingredient there, the unified field, unifying the. People are always saying, the theory of everything, or unifying, general relativity with quantum mechanics is the only thing missing there. Really, is consciousness. So there's a guy, his name is David Chalmers, who said, "So why don't we assign it essential, right? As a proper as there, it's core to everything." And atoms, quarks, leptons, whatever, they have what's called proto-consciousness, and they assemble themselves into all of these things. So at the core, there's consciousness, right? So and that removes, so the unified field is consciousness, and that removes a lot of the problems in physics. In fact, the math will show that if you put it in, it will solve a lot of the problems that's missing, including the hard problem of consciousness. But then that's hard to prove, right? It's hard to prove that such exists. And I take the position of Steven Pinker, out of Harvard, where he says, well, maybe that's where our knowledge ends. That there are points, there are certain areas of knowledge by which the limitations of our thinking and the limitations of our brain apparatus is actually limited. Well, maybe it is. That's why maybe it's pointless to ask proof, right, of that consciousness. Because if you do that, then I was working on this problem in 1988. It's a long time ago. And I was doing computational studies on this. And one of the things that we were asking is, well, how can you say that a rock is not conscious, right? It's because you cannot become a rock. And I think it's hubris for us to say that only we have consciousness. I proposed the term artificial ethology in 1990 in a paper. Ethology is the study of behavior and not artificial intelligence. And for the simple reason that if I see a child sitting down in a room, I will not say that the child is intelligent unless the child performs an intelligent behavior. Therefore, it's probably best to use artificial ethology, right? In order to do that. So when I was doing this, I was actually simulating microchips. What I was doing was I mathematically modeled the neuron, right? I mathematically modeled the neuron and what it does. And I put 381 of them together to mimic the nervous system of a worm called C. elegans. For those of you who don't know, C. elegans is like the workhorse now in anti-aging, because you could actually very easily count, the neurons. And I was the first person to actually produce a database of where all those connections were made. My book, which was published in 1992. It was used by less than 100 labs around the world. And then suddenly now a lot of people are reading and using it because of the resurgence of artificial intelligence, right? And that there's a name for it. It's now called the connectome. instead of a neural circuitry database of all the connections in C. elegans. So now there's an ohm for it. So when I was doing that, and it was suicide actually to propose research like that, is actually more simple. I said, if I take out the circuit that's for feeding, take out the circuit that's for mating, take out the circuit that's for locomotion, will I find a circuit in the nervous system that says, now I feed, now I mate, now I move? And you find when I did that model, I found out that I couldn't find such a circuit. And that's when I started belonging to the camp of the self is actually an illusion. That which is the commander of all of those doesn't really exist. It just is an epiphenomenon. It's something that comes up from the complexity of the system that's being studied. And if the C. elegans has 381 neurons, we have 86 billion neurons. So you imagine what a big jump that is. So that made it easy, because I love math for some reason. I didn't really ask for it, but I have an app for it. Speaking that kind of language makes it easier to bridge, to see what's missing in terms of our understanding. So if you go now from physics and what's missing, right, and putting in that element of consciousness in everything, and then you go to the nervous system where you see that the self is just an ad hoc neural network that just arises every now and then you could see how easy it is for me now to go form this bridge between that, which is extremely mathematical, extremely experimental. I was watching worms swim. They would swim towards a place where there's food, and they would swim away from the place where there's vinegar, because it would hurt them. So it's just like us, we have our sympathetic nervous systems. We either fight or flee, right? We feed and we reproduce. So those are very, very primitive things that are already present there as behaviors, right? So these are patterns of energy that are already there, right? So, and what we're doing is simply we're just carrying them over. But now that we know them, the more important question is, what do we do about these things? So I'm lucky to have learned about, the pre-Buddhist Bon spiritual tradition and the Buddhist traditions, specifically, the Vajrayana tradition, but of course this Theravada and there's Mahayana, the three main, and the Zen coming in from the Mahayana. And if you take a look at the teachings and so on, which is why I am writing about this, is that you can take a look at what the practices entail. The practices actually entail, going against the grain, some of our natural programming, right? Going against the grain of some of our natural programming. Look, in the biohacking world, what do we do? Look, if you have a biological drive of hunger, right, in order to survive, what do you do to counteract that in the biohacking world? You fucking fast, right? And we have all sorts of things. But if you take a look at it from a spiritual perspective, they've already been doing that. Even Jesus Christ is known to have done 40-day fasts, right, where he was tempted by the devil. Well, of course, you're when you're fasting for 40 days and you have your default mode network in 100% mode there, all the demons will come up, definitely, right? So you could see how easy it is to become to bridge from physics to neuroscience. Neuroscience, for example, look, when say you're looking at a pen, right? You're not really seeing the pen. You just have a concept of the pen, right? You're seeing, you're just seeing what it is, right? You're seeing what it is. But really, all it is a mapping or a representation in your brain of a concept of a pen. So, the statement, what you see around you isn't really reality. And the more difficult concepts come from Douglas Hoffman. I don't know whether or not you've encountered his work. He has a book, The Case Against Reality, where he says that the reality we see is really, we see them only because of evolutionary fitness function, or how fit we are to survive and reproduce, right? Essentially, is Einstein's question, when I'm not looking at the moon, does it exist? Essentially, Douglas Hoffman says, well, we see the moon only because of what it can give us in terms of fitness function, perhaps to be able to see at night when it's full, and confers a better protection with us, or to hunt better at night. But when we look away from the moon, essentially the brain does a data collection and actually removes that data structure in our brain. So it's no longer there. And this is now where we're getting at. There's the where the spiritual traditions and the scientific traditions actually meet. Is that in scientific traditions, which is now slowly being eroded, like by the works of Doug Hoffman, and proposals on including consciousness as a fundamental property of everything, is that scientifically we've always proceeded from what's called the empirical rational object perspective, right? So empirical rational or objective means that there's a world out there, that we're seeing, and when you keep our eyes closed, it's still there, right? And that's a simple way of objective reality. And it's the way that we are actually treating ourselves, right? But the other one is that there is no objective reality out there. Everything is being projected by us. It's like we're wearing virtual reality goggles, right? Or we're wearing virtual reality goggles, and we're projecting everything ourselves, and we see what we want to see. And you could see how the whole from this mathematical work comes the old saying, you create your own reality by putting in your VR. And the big question, in fact, is what happens? You were born with this virtual reality. What happens when you take it off, right? So what happens when you take it off is exactly what happens when you relax fully, and surrender yourself to pure consciousness. Everything disappears, right? Everything is just an appearance by itself. There is no emotion attached to it. There's no thought attached to it. There's no clinging, because that gives you the suffering. You see ice cream and you cling to the desire to have ice cream. You see a beautiful body and you cling to the desire to either make yourself that beautiful or have that beautiful person. So suddenly there's none of that. So we're tied back, right? So all of these things now are coming to the same conclusion, right? We just need to accept certain things into our scientific models, and then we will see that we're actually not that far off. But the whole issue that I'm after is that we should have a significant number of us human beings, making that transition. The favorite analogy that I have is given by Sam Harris, is that all our lives we're seated on a train, and we're used to looking outside and on the view, right? But every so often, like when you do a meditation practice, or even spontaneously, right, with the right angle of light and with the right angle of your head, you suddenly see your reflection in the mirror. And that's how superficial really the whole point of enlightenment is. And the whole point is being able to see that illusion that's you in the glass of the window, and looking outside at the same time. Ram Dass, famously said and famously repeated, being in this world but not of this world, right? So these are the kinds of they're not juxtapositions. These are kinds of integrations you could do very nicely now with the science that we have and with the kind of thinking that's there. But that didn't happen right away, right? The research on consciousness was a suicide, just like my career on it was killed, by a famous university by saying that my assertions were wrong and apologized to me 10 years later, but I was no longer working in the field, right? And now you could see a resurgence of that field, 30 years later. I'm already, practicing as a clinician, doing other things. But there is, and again, Luke, people like you, who have made it a point to actually inform people about this, to make sure that you can motivate them, to wake up and sustain that wakefulness, right? Sustain that.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there. I have this fantasy of taking all of the old paradigm thinkers and all of the people that are unable to break free from the lower nature animal self, that have no experience of having the witness perspective at all, especially those in power, and putting LSD or ayahuasca in the water supply. Twitter, and it doesn't even matter if it's like they're on the left or the right or whatever. I'm just like, God, I wonder what would happen if you just gave this person a healthy dose of DMT, or ketamine, or any of these things, that are a rocket ship, at least to give you a glimpse, And you mentioned Ram Dass. Eventually Ram Dass discarded the pursuit of psychedelics as a pathway by which to achieve enlightenment, because
it's temporary. Yeah.
Ultimate futility in that. Mm-hmm. But I, subjectively would give the analysis in my own personal experience that, God, it could have taken a lot longer had he, or in my own experience, not had those peak experiences to indicate to you that, okay, there's something way beyond my day-to-day humdrum perception, or the perception of the self from the self, right? It's like those windows into consciousness are only open temporarily. But as you said, if you integrate practices to keep them open and find ways on the natch, using just, your own self-discipline and habitual practices that don't require anything exogenously, that you can live more and more of the time in the world and not of the world, where you're living your life and you have a body and you want the ice cream and you're on a Zoom call, you're making a podcast, you're doing all the things, but at the same time, you're observing oneself doing those things and having
Yes, you're in a role. It's not your identity.
Right. But
you're in a role. It's not your identity.
Right. So there's one story I've got to tell you, and we've been going for a while here, and I appreciate your time, and it doesn't sound like you want to stop, and I don't either. So you just let me know. But
well, it's you, Luke.
Going back to the ketamine things, while you were speaking at so many points, I wanted to butt in and go, "Oh my God, Ted, I have to tell you this thing that happened."
Okay.
So I had maybe 10 times after I saw you, I would do those little microdose journeys, and I'd listen to a Joe Dispenza meditation, or I'd listen to some David R. Hawkins, some like audio teachings that I really wanted to integrate, or something I wanted to just delve into, or sometimes even just some pleasant music, right? And I would sort of just lay there for maybe an hour. Even in the hyperbaric chamber a couple times, I would go in there and take a little ketamine and do a brain tap journey with a little light show, and some hemispheric synchronization tracks and such, and had very minor experiences. So the way I was doing that was with troches, or an oxytocin and ketamine spray that a doctor of mine prescribed me. And those sprays are 150 milligrams per spray, and I would do 2 sprays. And so that would be 300 milligrams. And it was a, light journey. I mean, you don't want to walk around. I like being very still and not moving and having a very conscious intention about it, but it's not terribly psychedelic. And then I talked
You're rich, man. That's fucking expensive.
Talked to that doctor again. He said, well, what we're doing now is we're doing these lozenges, which is what a lot of the ketamine-assisted therapists are using in lieu of IVs, especially the ones now that are working remotely, as I'm going to do soon with Dr. David Rabin, who I think you might have met. clinical psychiatrist, neuroscientist, and a researcher in psychedelics. And so we're going to do a guided ketamine journey. But anyway,
perfect.
And sent me these lozenges that are 300 milligrams, which is about what I'd been doing and having these sort of relatively calm, easy journeys. So one night, it's like 11 p.m. I'm in bed with my girlfriend. I have a new girlfriend now, and all is well. So thank you for that. Because you gave me some great advice about relationships too. I'm going to cut to that. I said, I was struggling a little bit at one point, and it was difficult the day you came over, actually. And you said, man, the way I look at it, Luke, is like, if your relationship is so much work, you're in the wrong relationship. And that was a paradigm shifting statement to me, because there is, this group think that like, oh, you really got to be in the trenches and just working on stuff, and it's going to bring out the shadow, and you guys just have to be continually fighting and then working it out and fighting and working out. And I really had this erroneous belief that was true. And my lovely partner, Allison, who's upstairs now, I mean, it is the exact opposite of that. So you were right. It's a different kind of work. It's a heart opening, an intimacy allowing, a surrendering into vulnerability kind of work that doesn't have to be drama. It's love. So thank you for that. Anyway, I'm just as a side note.
Glad to be of help.
It was a powerful lesson, because you seem like a really happy guy. So it's like, I take advice from people that have what I want, that are or they're modeling some formula that is working for them. I don't listen to people that talk about it. I listen to people that live it, so thank you. I digress. Anyway, so it's about 11 at night. I'm kind of awake. I don't really feel like going to sleep, but my girlfriend Allison has fallen asleep next to me. So I had an idea. I thought, I got those ketamine lozenges. I haven't tried one of those yet. I'll just take one of those, put it under my tongue, listen to a ketamine playlist on Spotify in my headphones, and I'll just, gently fall asleep afterward, as I had done many times before. I put this thing in my mouth. 15 minutes later, dude, I can't feel my body. I'm paralyzed. I can't move my body. I'm sitting there going, holy shit, what if I'm dying and I can't even move to shake my girlfriend to call 911? I mean, I started to get...
You can't.
Yeah. And then I went into this place. I mean, the playlist helped too, because it was so psychedelic, but it was like, I can only describe it as like a really deep ayahuasca journey, but where you're paralyzed and can't move, which doesn't sound particularly pleasurable. But what I experienced was being taken to the point of non-existence, to where even when I opened my eyes, the room was gone because it was dark in the room. When I closed my eyes, I was gone. The girlfriend, that's all not real. The pandemic's not real. This house isn't real. The whole life was not real. There was no life to go back to. And there was a moment of fear and trepidation there, because I thought that perhaps I had transcended this physical dimension and was in some other dimension, and had in fact become trapped there, where I wasn't going to be able to come back to here. And I was faced with the attachment of this experience and this personality and the self and the me. And I had to make a decision to just breathe into it and let go, because I couldn't make it stop. And
yes. My advice, because I do ketamine therapy about twice a week, right? Which is, and
as a patient, not a clinician.
I have a therapist, but I seem to know more about it than my therapist does. No, I'm kidding. My therapist is great. No, I have studied pharmacology, so I know my ketamine quite well. Look, 300 milligrams is really way too high. For those who are doing Turkey, for example, I actually usually advise them to start at a very low dose of 25, just to keep you going, right? Unfortunately, at those low doses, some people are actually very sensitive to nausea, right? But it doesn't guarantee that a high dose won't give you nausea, but it's a sensitivity phase, right? And then you increase it the next week to about a 50 by 25, and 100 should get you there. So 300 is like 3 times what I would recommend. And here's what I actually tell them: empty your bladder fully before you get to bed. right? Before you close your eyes. Empty your bladder fully. It would be better if your room was darkened. Make sure that you have music in there that you actually like. And I prefer no lyrics. Music with no lyrics is a lot better than music with lyrics, right? Something that would just, for me, something that's repetitive would be great. And then when you are already anticipate in your head that you are going to be like a corpse. However, put this in your mind, right? As a physician, for me, my mind is like, it does not depress respiratory function. So it will not stop you breathing. That's why it's such a good anesthetic in the battlefield for soldiers, right? It does not depress respiratory function. And then, of course, the fear that came up is like, what if I choke on my own saliva while in it? So, and then, if you start panicking and start swallowing, it's going to get you into trouble.
So, Ted, what you're saying is you want to sort of work your way up to the effective dose on ketamine.
Yes.
And
yes.
Environmentally and in terms of your expectations, understand that what you're doing is safe. And this is not like a blanket recommendation for anyone and everyone.
Yes.
Like I always say with any journeys or plant medicines or psychedelics. I mean, it's not for everyone and it's not for everyone all the time.
So for me personally, what I did was I worked my way up, from that. And for me, 100 milligrams, you have to expect that your body will totally get paralyzed. It will totally get paralyzed. If you're afraid of locked-in syndrome, don't do it. Locked-in syndrome is when you're fully conscious and your body can't move, right? But that's exactly what will happen. But what's as I said, it activates the glutamate in your brain, so your cortex is actually quite active, right? And when that's active, like your posterior parietal cortex, your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, when they're active, they usually shut down your default mode network, which is made up of the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex mainly. But anyway, those are midline structures, so it quiets down. That's why the quick way of explaining it in what it does to you is that it does a reset, right? It quiets it. And since depressives are known, right, to have a hyperactive default mode network, because there's a strong ego there that's owning all of the story, that's actually quieted down. When you are at a high dose, like at 100 milligrams, then that really, really goes down. So 300 for you was really fucking high, man. And what you should remember there is the reassurance that, it doesn't depress your respiratory function. Second is you have to remember to surrender. Otherwise, you will panic,
That's where I got to, because the experience was, as I said, I was able to discern that there was a witness perspective, the higher self, the true self, the me. And then there was the self that was afraid that it wasn't alive anymore. And the observation allowed me to see that if there had been someone there that I could have just tapped and said, "Hey, am I still here?" And they said, "Yeah, you're still here," then the surrender would have come much easier. And that, I think, leads to the wisdom in having a guide in any experience like this, especially when you're going to go deeper. Had I had a therapist there going, "Okay, Luke, what are you feeling now?" I go, "Oh, wait, there's still a me." Okay. But because I didn't want to wake my girlfriend up and freak her out or have her call 911 or something, I just had to stay in it. And then it brought me to that place of just, well, if I'm never coming back and I'm dead or in another dimension permanently and there's no more Luke and there's no more life and podcasts and all these things, okay, here we go. And I just breathe and I let go. And then I was safe. And it really was just in making that decision to fully let go. And then as it started to subside, which is one of the great things about that particular medicine, is it doesn't last, 8 hours, 10 hours like some psychedelics do, but it started to subside. And I just thought to myself, okay, note to self, Luke, take less next time, have a guide, tell someone, tell someone you're going to do it. Because that was the thing, because no one knew. It added to that sense of isolation and like, oh, shit, I am truly alone here because no one even knows I'm in this other dimension that I'm caught in. How's anyone going to come after me and fetch me out of here? So it was it was an educational experience. Let me just say that, and one that I would not recommend people replicate in that fashion. But it was profoundly interesting, in that it was, I would say, as psychedelic, if not more, than many ayahuasca journeys and other things that I've done in the past.
Yes,
it was.
It's just shorter acting.
Yeah,
it's just shorter acting. In fact, there was a mention of just recently, because what we're doing now for treatment-resistant depression, or TRD, right? And I recommend, if someone is considering ketamine therapy for depression and so on, and you've not been helped by other pharmacological agents, is you have do it with a ketamine therapist, right? And the ketamine therapist is usually either a separate doctor or the same doctor as a psychiatrist, because the best outcomes come from someone who is integrated with the psychotherapy of it, where you talk about the experience and so forth. If you, it's not a recreational drug, right? I know that it's called Special K and so on. At 25 milligrams, I have I had a different response to it. When I took that, the first time I took it, I was extremely nauseated. And the second time I took it, I wanted to solve mathematical problems. So it was like, these are two separate experiences. After that, you begin to get into the anesthesia modes. However, what I recommended to a friend of mine is who is a ketamine therapist, I told him that there's a portion of the journey with ketamine that's very, very hypnagogic, right? It means you can hypnotize yourself at that state, and you're already at a hypnotic state. So I said, why not when you are in that state? Because you know what phase is going to be based on the dose, right? Put in like the patient's or the client's words in there, and hypnotizing himself to be this, and this, when the subconscious is more receptive. I said, hey, this is a drug-induced hypnosis after all, then why don't you just utilize that? So rather than, feeling it with music, at that particular point in time, you feel it with suggestions. It's better if the suggestions, of course, are in your own words. But that's just an idea that I had, just taking a look at the phases of ketamine.
On that note, do you happen to know what brainwaves are predominant in the midst of a ketamine journey? Are you in like theta, or that?
You're in theta, right? The deep part, you're in theta, but your brain is awake. See, so you're not doing delta.
Right.
What I want to see, and what I want to see, is actually a study of whether or not there will be bursts of high gamma. Well, it can be your enlightenment drug, which I've been trying to. So look, if I can teach people to have a practice of being able to see that the is an illusory neural network that just comes up in the brain, can I come up with some troche that you shove it in, and for 8 to 12 hours, you're totally conscious of when your ego's coming up.
Yeah. I like that idea a lot. That brings me to the other thing, and we covered this a little bit last time, and I'm just going to have to interview you again because I have 50 more questions, and we're at like, we've been going for a while.
Hour 3.
No, there's so many things. I'm like, I got to ask him about this and that and this and that. But last time you were talking about this pharmahuasca or achahuasca,
yes,
I called it, and
yes,
indicated that you have an aversion to nausea, but you do like the positive benefits and explorations of ayahuasca. And so I don't think I asked you last time, had you taken, drank ayahuasca brew and then realized like, wow, there's really something there, but can we remove the part that makes you sick? Is that how you arrived at that design?
See, it's like this. I've always, essentially 25 years ago, I was a dear friend of mine offered it to me. And I know it's a gift, right? But I was like, this scientist that said, no, I'm not gonna, put anything in my system that's not natural to me, blah, blah, blah. And I find out that DMT is being produced by the body. So what the fuck? So anyway, my first forays it were the natural ones. So it used the Banisteriopsis caapi vine, which is an irreversible liver inhibitor, right? And Psychotria viridis in a brew, which is the traditional
So that's the
ayahuasca brew.
vine and the chacruna leaf, and the leaf, the one DMT.
Is the one containing DMT, and the other one is simply to prevent the degradation, right?
Okay. Right.
And I know many people will get mad at me for saying this, that the vomiting or purging, they say it's part of the process, etc. I go, no. That's just an effect of the liver inhibitor, and that's why it's now incorporated in the lore. You see. You can take it. It's incorporated in the lore. You throw up and so on. You clean yourself. It's like, fuck that, So, what I remember distinctly from taking the brew the first time, which was actually funny and at the same time frustrating, is that I would throw up, right? I would throw up. And then I would see the fragments of my vomitus just come up at me. Like, it's like, that's the hallucinations is happening. Like, you throw up and it just flies right back up at you. So, and it was incredible. I mean, the clouds became angel wings. The sky collapsed into fractals. You could see where what's that movie with Jim Carrey? Finding out that he was swimming to the end of
the Truman Show.
Yeah. You see the where the divisions were on the world fractal, but I could not concentrate. Kept on throwing up, right? So the experience was so jagged, right? It was too jagged for me that I went to take a look. I said, why do I have this type of reaction to it? Aside from the fact that there are actually liver inhibiting drugs that are used in psychiatry. They're like imipramine or something. They have the same effect. They're irreversible, meaning when they're there, you cannot unbind them from the enzyme that does the detoxification of the drug, right? And so I looked at my DNA study, and I took a look at where the inhibitor, the Banisteriopsis caapi inhibitor, was working on, and it's working on a gene where I had a very, very sluggish performance of the gene. So it means I could not really clear out the vine. I could not detoxify the thing quickly. That's why it stayed in my system for a long time and kept me vomiting. Right? So I said, well, I'm a pharmacologist. I might as well be able to figure this out because there's something there, right? Something in the experience that once you've seen, you can no longer unsee, right? And I did it by the beach, and I looked at the sand, I looked at my hand, and I said, oh my God, I have hands. They look very alien. And then I looked at the beach, and they look like Carlos Castaneda paintings, which is like, oh, this is interesting. That's why the paintings were like that.
Right.
Okay. Now I got it. So I said, can I make it such that I can have the same experience, right, without the vomiting part? Because I can't seem to. It's just like smoking DMT. It's too short to bring anything back. It's just enough to see, right? But not enough to see other dimensions, but not enough to bring anything substantial back. True, you get the experience of the death of the self, right? But the disappearance of the illusion, but it's very short. So I took a look. There's a reversible inhibitor that I found in Europe, and then, well, okay, that's legal. Now I have to find my own crystals. Well, there's none, right? So you have to extract your own. And so I extracted my own, and I started my protocol, right?
One second, Ted. When you say extracted your own, you got raw chacruna leaf and extracted the crystals from that?
Yeah, I got another. It's not the chacruna leaf that I use. If I had chacruna leaf, I would probably have used it. But there are many plants that are high in DMT. For example, the root bark of acacia. That's being sold, especially the pink acacia. They're sold and so on. And there's a method of extraction that you can use, or methods of purification that you can use, and so on. But for me, I just wanted to find out whether or not this can be done by protocol, right? Just like a scientist would. You don't know how much DMT is in the brew of the shaman, and so on and so forth. And I'm sorry to if I offend other people who uh, consider shaman as essential to spirituality. I am not. I am not saying that at all. What I mean is that for people like me who can't stand the throwing up, even if I explain it to the shaman would not understand, right? Because I'm looking at this from my genetic component and the basis for why the vomiting is occurring. So I had to work out two things. I had to work out the lowest dose that could be administered. I'm a canary in a coal mine when it comes to these things. I'm very sensitive. And how much of the reversible inhibitor to give. So I had to work out that on myself, right? And another friend of mine also helped me with that. And of course, I would be the sitter the first time. And the first time I gave it, his very first sentence was, "Ted, you should come here. This is where all the shamans go." And I said, okay, there's something to the protocol. It's working, it needs to get refined and so on. And of course, as a physician, I'm also monitoring, vital signs and all that kind of stuff. Aside from the stream of consciousness that's coming out, right? Whether or not he wanted to talk or didn't want to talk, and so on. So finally, I got the protocol worked out, and I did it to myself essentially once every 2 months for 2 years. And that's when things that happen are, I would wake up like at 4 a.m. and I would be having like a total body orgasm, right? It's like, and that's the biggest gift, right? It's a feeling that no matter what happens, everything is fine. I call it the unfathomable sense of security, right? No matter what happens, everything's fine. And that occurred for several months, even after I took it. So there's something in there, whether or not it's the molecule or the molecule, I suspect the molecule itself, creating a different arrangement of the molecules in the brain to allow us to perceive other dimensions, even though our limited brains can only present us the dimension that way, right? They say that the plants are the teachers. I would suspect that it would those molecules came from those plants anyway, and it's the vibratory state of the molecule where it wants to bring you or where it can bring you, right? Where you could experience. When you asked me, did I see there's something there? I remember Dennis McKenna saying. He said, if you're Catholic, you take the Holy Eucharist and nothing happens. But here you take the ayahuasca, and whether you like it or not, something happens. So it's the same. It's the same thing. Something happens, but for me, it's the realization, that there are dimensions out there that you can't see. So from someone who's totally locked in an empirical rational state, seeing that there are other dimensions in there that you can't see and that you cannot traverse, and you cannot build rocket ships to get to them. One of the beauties of string theory is that they have to, like, the superstring, I think, has 26 dimensions. So you could see that they're working on all of these dimensions that are folded upon themselves. So it's not a far connection to make. If these are the models that we're seeing with what we're doing, right? And this is what we're experiencing, and we're saying, okay, here are the dimensions that we're seeing. Then for me, it's an easy bridge to make, because it's where we're converging anyway with an objective type of thinking versus a subjective or feeling type of realization, right? Vipassana or insight meditation, would have given this insights a very long time ago. It just so happens that there are certain drugs that do it, right? That push you, whether you like it or not, it will push you to open that. Other people get too afraid, right? Or other people think that it will last them a lifetime, but it doesn't. It doesn't. You have to have a practice continually after that.
Well, this idea of your manipulation of the different molecules in these brews is interesting to me on a number of levels. One of the main levels in that my own subjective experience with ayahuasca, which at the time of this recording has been 8 full-on journeys, is that each one of those, including 2 of the 8 where I didn't really feel any psychoactive effect and was pretty miserable the whole time, and still derived benefit and insights after the fact, even though it felt like nothing was happening. The other ones were profound and interdimensional, talking to ETs, just completely otherworldly in every way. One thing that I found congruent throughout all 8 experiences was that the physical sickness part of it and the discomfort was such a distraction to the work that I was there to do. I'm not drinking ayahuasca to see funny colors and like talk to little green men. I have no interest in that. It's not productive. I could watch a movie and be entertained and feel less sick for less money. But it's like, so I'm having a realization about some childhood trauma, let's just say, and going, oh my God, my mind's being blown. I just had an awareness or an insight that could have taken me 150 years of therapy to get to, right? And that medicine in one instance is just like, boom, here's what happened to you. Here's how it affected you. This shaped your whole life, which happened to me a number of different times. So I start to go down that wormhole and explore that through the realms of the quantum and from a place of consciousness, because as you said, now I've superseded the physical reality and I'm working interdimensionally now on the consciousness level, and I'm going into that quantum space, and I, through my spiritual will, am going in and working on things and having realizations and connecting synapses and dots and really moving the needle on my human and spiritual experience. Then comes the thought, am I about to shit my pants right now?
Yeah.
Should I roll over to my left side? Oh, no, I might puke. Let me roll over this way. Then I'm back in my body, and I'm back there being distracted by that, even though I do have the ability in most cases to surrender to the discomfort. It's not that I'm fighting it or that I'm caught in the resistance trap, because I'm familiar with that and I know how to get past that, as described in my ketamine experience. It took a minute there, but I was able to pass through the surrender portal and let go of the discomfort. So it's not that it's like I'm unwilling to have discomfort and that I can't surrender, because I can. It's more like, yeah. Okay, I get it. I can move past that. But what if it's just not there and I can just go straight consciousness the whole time and work on what I want to work on, which is healing my family lineage and, understanding my dharma and my purpose in this incarnation, and those really impactful realizations that come in that space. And so when you told me that you had discovered a way to achieve those same objectives spiritually without having to be encumbered by the distraction of the physical discomfort, that really got my attention. Now, I have mentioned that to a few people, just, wow, what a concept this is. And I wonder what this means for the future when people like you and regulatory agencies, are loosening up the reins as they are with things like psilocybin and ketamine therapy and things like this. What happens when pharmahuasca just becomes part of the repertoire there? How exciting. And the traditionalists, on the other side say, well, then you're raping the plant, you're discounting the plant's innate intelligence, you're shitting on the shamanic traditions that have lasted thousands of years, etc. And I do honor that perspective, but at the same time, it's like, to me, those plants and their innate intelligence is what put it in your head to mix those two things together. Do you see what I mean? It's just that the plant innate intelligence isn't the one saying to a chemist, wow, we can make LSD. That's not a plant, but somehow that biological organism carrying around consciousness in the form of a human being with a chemistry set went, hey, if we put this, and this together, something happens, right? So it's like, I respect and honor the traditions, but at the same time, have to respect the ingenuity of humankind and divine inspiration that works through us humans to develop other means by which to awaken. So it's not like an either or. To me, it's both are right, both are great. It's what serves you in any given moment. And I can tell you from my experience, I haven't done, the medicine the way you prepare it, but I'm guessing if I had a choice between A and B and I get the same net result with less suffering, I'm going to choose the one with less suffering with just...
Yeah, look,
bits.
For me, I really, like Blue Cannatine, I really made it out of necessity because I really wanted, to take it. But it was just, impossible for me. You're puking. Every now and then you have to run to the toilet. When you go to actual places, they will give you a vomit bucket, right? So but what I'm saying is that we have believed in the story. We've come to believe in the story, and that should be the story, and so on. I'm not denigrating the traditional forms. In fact, I was with a most wonderful shaman who travels around the world doing this traditional ayahuasca ceremony, like 3 weeks ago. And I was asked, what do you think is the future of this? And I said, look, there's very few of him, and it's wonderful for people to experience what it is to be in a traditional ceremony. But if you ask me what the future is like, we have to ask, what are we doing this for, right? Why are we doing this? And for me, it's like, because we want to wake people up, because what we're doing to the earth and to ourselves and to our relationships with other humans is not sustainable, right? So I said, we now know, for example, receptors for LSD, the 5-HT2A receptors, and we know the receptors for DMT and so on and so forth. What's going to happen? I said, the way I predict things is going to happen is that if we want to have, these substances that will show the illusoriness of the self and make clear to you your cravings and aversions, to things, and expose the ego for the illusion that it is, then we have to use probably artificial intelligence the way we're using it to find molecules now, for drugs. So we take a look at, the following, DMT works on the following receptors, LSD work on the following receptors, and so on. And we'll see, let's apply all artificial intelligence is good at is finding patterns. Like from the large amount of data, it could pick out molecules that can either be natural or synthetic. You can, there's a pathway to synthesize them, as Sasha Shulgin has done for so many years. To synthesize them and see what their effects are going to be. One of the things that I was thinking early on, for example, even for Blue Cannatine, does it activate the task positive network or even the central executive network of the brain? That's why it dampens your ego a little bit, so you could focus on your task, right? There's no rumination going on. So these are the kinds of things I think that rather than training more shamans and training more people, that would be good. If people are interested in doing that, that's perfect. If people are interested in going to retreats, to take this, that's perfect. But don't expect that after coming out of those instances, you're going to be enlightened, right? So what we're looking at now is, if we want to improve it on the scientific part, let's start with a pharmahuasca or ayahuasca. as my friends love to say. Let's start from there, and then let's take a look at the other receptors that are available. What could switch off the DMN more effectively? How can they remove, for example, the dopaminergic component of LSD? Which keeps your ego up. Actually, it can keep your ego up. So and then we could have either natural or synthetic molecules identified to do this, and that's how we go, right? That's how we proceed, or it could be combination of certain molecules. Like, for example, for example, I'm suspecting that something combined with psilocybin, which decreases the activity of the DMN, with something that increases the activity of the task positive network, will probably work, right? Will probably make the illusoriness of the self appear there. So it doesn't mean that just because they are traditional doesn't mean that they're sacred. It only means that there is room for improvement if you want to move forward with the new generation, right? With the new generation of people and using the technology. And so on. But by all means, if you have the means to experience what the traditional ceremony is, go ahead. It's very enlightening, to work with the shaman. They work with, the tobacco and all of those, they blow smoke. And so that's wonderful. But how do you'd be facing, of course, the medical establishment and all of that. They would like to know, okay, what's the dose? What's the protocol, and how do you do this? How much inhibition is there going on, and so on and so forth. You have to satisfy those two, right? Until they experience it and they say, what the fuck about the dose, right? And when they experience they go,
That's interesting that you bring that up, because I have noticed in my limited experience of those 8 ceremonies that especially in the first 4, in which the brew was from a different place in South America every night. There was like Peru night, then Brazil night, Colombia night, and it had been brewed there and brought to Costa Rica, where I did it at Rhythmia. And oh my God, such a different experience every time. The medicine really does have a different energetic, and I'm sure biological makeup. It's just certainly like impossible to measure a dose. And even when I went and did my 4 through 8 ceremonies, it was with the Shipibo tradition at Soltara in Costa Rica. And in that tradition, you choose your own dose. And I wasn't used to that, because the first 4, I'd walk up and the shaman kind of looks me over, blows some tobacco on me, and then fills up the cup. And I take it and I just trust his or her guidance and intuition, and that they're connected to source, and I'm going to be done right. And I was. But I found it very difficult to go when it was up to me, because they're like, well, how much you want? I'm like, I don't know. Like, that's your job. And they said, well, you need to tune into the medicine and take your own dose. And it was actually kind of sucked, because one night I felt like I took too much. Another night I was like, God damn it, I didn't take enough. I didn't really take off. And it was a little bit frustrating in the sense that, and needless to say, I surrendered into all those experiences and it was all great and amazing. But it did also occur to me, wow, it wouldn't hurt as an alternate method to have a very measurable dose and to kind of know what that's going to do for my body type and size and makeup and chemistry, so that if I want to have X journey, it's somewhat predictable and I can really work with that in a more structured way.
Yes. And if you drink a lot of alcohol, your liver inhibition will be different, because you will be so used to degrading those kinds of molecules. But anyway, what you said, actually, I have a little story with that. I have a friend that I took on a journey and first on ayahuasca, and then she decided to go to Peru to experience, the traditional ceremony. And when the shaman gave her, that specific amount that just handed to her, and this is too little, I need more. And the shaman sort of like looks at her like almost angrily. It's like, and then gives her more and said, no, this is too little. I want some more. And then she said something that was really very funny. At the third day, she said, Ted, I'm leaving. I said, when I was taking your ayahuasca, I said, I saw everything in HD TV. Here, it's just like watching TV with a really very bad reception because she was vomiting.
Man.
But anyway, the whole purpose, as I said, it could be ayahuasca, it could be psilocybin, it could be ketamine. All of these are acting in a way just in terms of decreasing suffering. When you have suffering being defined as identifying with your cravings and aversion as you, right? Identifying with the ego, even just to just for that brief moment, essentially reveal the illusoriness of the ego that is not really there. So if that's the purpose, then that's the sort of like anabolic steroid of the mental gym that you can use. It's also a good pointing out instruction rather than going to a Dzogchen master and having the nature of your mind pointed out to you, asking you questions like who are you and so on. It's faster, but the caveat always is that it's temporary. You have to get your lessons from there, and then get yourself into a practice where becoming more and more aware that the part of you that's wanting things and desiring things and pushing away experiences and so on is an illusion, right? Is an illusion. It's what makes you suffer. Right? It's the clinging to those is what makes you suffer, and therefore it's the root of suffering. Right? If we could actually wake people up to that by substances and then by practices and so on, then we could have what we began this whole thing with, a more coherent species-wide awareness. Where do we want to bring ourselves to the future? As I say, I'm saying, we cannot just be drones, just working and reproducing and working and reproducing and repeating all these experiences over and over. What's the overarching plan that we have for a species? Where do we want to go from here? And that's impossible to do if we could continue having an environment, developing environments and technologies that only gets to fortify the ego. Look, even for those who have taken like pharmahuasca or ayahuasca for many, many doses, etc., they could have a massive egoic snapback. If you don't have a continuing practice, you can have a massive egoic snapback. Or, for example, your default mode network, because the ego is hard to get rid of, right? It's there to protect you from evolution. So it could snap back very, very harshly, and you could just turn away from everything that you've learned. So and that's the danger, right? That's the danger of these things. They just much like the anabolic steroids that you use for bodybuilding, can be dangerous. These substances can be dangerous, not solely in the physical sense, but in the egoic sense, right? That the self or the self-referential system can come back with a vengeance. No matter what is it that they say, Luke. If you think you're enlightened, try spending a day with your family. So.
I love that one. That's one of my. It's that. It's the phenomenon of the spiritual ego, right? Where one starts to make gains spiritually from a true and earnest place, starts to have God realization, merging toward enlightenment, and then all the while the ego is there also observing that as part of its potential value system, so that then it starts to take over that spiritual identity, right? And this is the fall of the guru. And you see great teachers are, then all of a sudden you find out they were sexual predators or, greedy and just, obsessed with wealth and Rolls Royces or whatever the case may be. It's a really interesting phenomenon within humans to observe, is without the awareness that that's a potential risk that one must look out for, then you can come back from a journey and like, I am God now because I'm God, and this like spiritual ego is like another layer or just a different sort of aspect of ego that's not going out into the world full of hate and malice, but rather using the auspice of being peaceful and loving and enlightened and spiritual and being a yogi with the beads and, you know, the meditation pose. But still behind that is the same rapacious, self-seeking, egoic consciousness that was there before. It's sort of come about now with a different mask.
Well, there's a simpler example that I give to that, Luke, is that all of these CEOs of large companies would hire this guy, right? And he would give them a microdose of psilocybin and walk them through, go take them through a nature hike for several hours in a day, and talk about instead of looking at the illusoriness of the self and all of that, and explaining, how, especially there on a microdose, at least the self-referential system is dampened, right? They will say, okay, how do I use this now in order to have profit for my company and, make my employees more productive and so on and so forth. And suddenly the ego is using now the techniques, right? That is intended to decrease suffering, to increase suffering, right? But that's not what they're realizing. They're realizing is that it's just another tool for me to become quote unquote productive, right? I'm now more productive in work, productive in this and this and this. It's like, but really, don't we have something deeper to realize with these things, right?
Yeah.
I keep on explaining to people that most of the people haven't seen what I have seen, right? When I was a physician, I worked at an emergency room where I would be triaging people who were shot in the back from summary executions, see who were still alive and see who were still dead. I would, serve as a doctor to where you have to wade knee deep in mud to deliver, healthcare to a family of 6 living in a 2x6 square meter house in a garbage pile. Most of the world don't have this experience and don't see this. And sometimes they see me as like, oh, you can say that because you've always have a charmed life. It's not exactly that, and those experiences, although they shaped, a lot of that history shaped a lot of my points of view, it also escalated my desire to see that we hold a different perspective, a non-egoic perspective towards ourselves, because I've seen that kind of suffering. I'm working now with the privileged class, and politicians and what have you. But when you come and have all of those experiences, you see that that's a result of our cravings and aversions, right? If people haven't seen, for example, I was delivering, the baby of this, the 12th baby of this woman who had, there were 6 different fathers, right? And I tell her, come tomorrow, let's get you to the ligation clinic, because your uterus is already so thin. If you have another baby, and she was not prepared. She was obviously extremely poor, etc. And of course, she didn't show up. So we see I've seen all of these kinds of poverty. I've been there delivering this, that kind of service to other people. And most Americans don't realize, the poverty that we know here is different from the poverty that we see elsewhere in the world. So it's a different form of, for me, the quality of compassion is, for me, it there's a hastening that comes, because you've seen this before. And we're seeing here, and what I see here is actually very funny, because people are beside themselves, staying at home, not being able to be alone with their thoughts, try fucking surviving with 6 kids in the middle of a garbage pile. These are the things that people think are unthinkable, but they are occurring also in the world. And there is a beautiful short story on the relativity of morality, right? That there's this fictional place called Omelas, where it's really just this beautiful place where all the virtues are, and it's a utopia. You can take whatever drugs you need to take, and so on and so forth. There will be no punishment, and so on. So the story opens with a beautiful rite of spring, and so on, and it's peaceful, and so on. But if you're at a certain age, you're brought to this place where there's one dark room, and they open the door, and there's a child in there that's never seen sunlight. Is given one plate of gruel a day, and he's in chains, and he basically stands up and sits down in his own piece and shit, and he's there in that place, and you are told he is the reason why Omelas is prosperous. Right? You have to keep him in chains like this, right? Otherwise, the whole city of Omelas will start to disintegrate from its prosperity and happiness and so on. And the story in there is that some people, after seeing the child, they just leave, and they continue walking away from Omelas. And take a look at us. That's why for me, when you get a Starbucks coffee for $6, for example, it's so much sweeter for me to drink that, only because I know that $6 is going to feed a child for 2 or 3 days somewhere else in the world. We're worse than Omelas. All of these people are living in poverty at our expense. So when you look at things that way, you could see why I feel acutely, why we have to wake up from this nightmare that we have created for ourselves, right? We are not only taking one child, and we are taking, a large part of the population and keeping them, in a dark room, where they're only fed once a day, and they live where they shit and piss. So I'm not trying to proselytize, about this. It's just that for me, it's personal. That it's time for us to explore all these things. Just experience selflessness with ayahuasca, ketamine, DMT, and so on. Just to imagine what selflessness is like. Explore a meditation practice, or other, yoga or other practices that take away, that reveal for you the illusion of the ego that wants and wants and wants to experience things, and say what's enough, what's enough for us. When do we stop this madness? Just unbridled reproduction, encroaching on environmental turf, where we decrease the balance. We upset the balance of the species that are occurring. It's true that this will occur, but we're also hastening our own demise here if we don't get into a cohesive plan as a species as to what we're going to do. Right? That's why, for example, I donate a lot to education, right? Because that when you educate people, the birth rates go down in highly educated countries, right? In countries where there is not much education, the birth rates are up. Well, probably after COVID-19 pandemic is done, we see the birth rates go up, and that just shows you that we cannot stand our own thoughts. We'd rather be doing something else. But anyway,
interesting prediction that hadn't crossed my mind yet. Well, Ted, I appreciate that perspective and everything you are and everything that you do. And I feel like that's even though selfishly I have 50 more questions, I'm going to save my notes for our next conversation because I have many more. But I think this is a good place to kind of bring the conversation to an end. And I think we've given a really well-rounded approach to consciousness and taking some time to really ask ourselves questions and to determine what life is all about, what gives it meaning, how we can contribute, how we can alter our point of view, how we can ease the suffering of ourselves and pass that along to others. And like at this particular time in our human experience, I don't think there's anything more important to talk about. And as of late, I've been just felt compelled to point out some of the inconsistencies in the official narrative of what's going on at this time. And of course, this will have been recorded when things will have changed by the time this conversation comes out. But, there are some conspiratorial elements of what's happening that aren't adding up to me and many other people. And tech censorship and the silencing of voices in alternative medicine and all sorts of things that are very disconcerting to me. And it's been really important for me to have this conversation to remember that it's about just increasing the light and increasing consciousness, and fighting negativity with negativity is a futile battle that you will never win. And so this has been a great reminder to me of that, and an opportunity to share a really positive perspective with people, especially when they might be in a situation that appears to them to be quite negative.
Well, yes. The simple way to remember it is the virus is neither democratic nor Republican nor independent. It will just do what it does. And if it happens to make you sick and kill you, that's what it does. And, it's sad to hear from me. It's just sad to hear Harvard ethicists say, for example, that not being able to go to a restaurant is a violation of our civil rights. And I said, virus doesn't care about your civil rights, baby. What? So what? How are we going to do this? We've placed so many elements on top of things that are fundamental. So let's look beyond those elements, those artificial things that we placed on top, and let's take a look and stay at what's really going on. And if you're going to end this, let's stay to where it is, right? As it is.
Ted, who have been 3 teachers or teachings that have influenced your life and your work that you might recommend?
Actually, the teachings that I have come from difficult to read esoteric books on Buddhism. I would encourage people more to read the books of the more modern teachers. For example, the old, I call it old now, it's a few years old, Sam Harris's Waking Up book and his app, the work of Judson Brewer on addiction, for example, the work of Shinzen Yang, who is very tech friendly, on the use of like headbands, to meditate, as an e-meditator, and then the works of people who are in physics, because physicists are often asked about consciousness, right? And Brian Greene just released his book Till the End of Time, and there's of course the difficult read but worth it. Douglas Hoffman and The Case Against Reality. So I would encourage people more, because you will be more convinced, reading contemporary. It was a difficult path for me to go from esoteric, like Bon type of readings, the 9 ways of Bon and the different practices, and so on and so forth, going into the tantras, the sutras, and all of that, from Hinduism, Buddhism, and so forth. That's a more difficult path, especially if you don't have someone teaching you. But there are these contemporary authors will actually show you Dan Harris also is another one. He's a 10% happier. These are the kinds of books that I would recommend the current generation to read, because then if they go back to Buddhist teachings, and start studying it more as an interest, and then more fervently, they would already have like a scientific or neuroscientific or a physics basis for the readings. So I'm more for flipping things around, rather than going the way I did it. It's easier, so to speak to the way that the generation right now speaks. Right.
Awesome. Thanks for the recommendations. That's quite a handful of stuff for people to begin with. And thanks for the sage advice on all things we covered today. In closing, where can people find you on social media, websites, etc.?
Well, we've been doing this on Transcriptions on Instagram, and of course, transcriptions.com, where you can get Blue Cannatine and the other products that are forthcoming, especially the pure methylene blue. We call it just blue. We hope that JetBlue doesn't sue us. And then for my nonprofit work, I started a nonprofit to teach physicians and healthcare practitioners on how to optimize health at homehope.org. We've just released our initial module was clinical metabolomics. It was released last year. We just released 2 other modules on epigenetics and on mitochondria. And probably in a week or so, we'll be releasing our module on gut immune system. So that's up. You can see what a quarantine can do, right? The modules are getting made, and we have chronobiology, evolutionary medicine, and exposomics coming up. So that's at homehope.org. If you're interested in becoming a practitioner, that's also where you want to go, and you'll get to interact with someone crazy like me.
That's awesome. You just brought up one last question I'm going to sneak in, because you mentioned mitochondria. To what degree do you think that our levels of deuterium in the body hinder mitochondrial function? If they do, and do you think that setting about to lower your deuterium levels through drinking deuterium depleted water and fasting and being on a keto diet will help that along? Meaning I'm going to use crude terms here, but my understanding based on a few interviews is the deuterium gumming up the nanomotors in the mitochondria and rendering them less effective at producing ATP. Do you think all of that is relevant and worth pursuing and working on?
For me, I have very practical advice on these things, because the study that I looked at with credibility is a study that was done that shows that the mitochondria depletes the deuterium of its own water. So what's in the mitochondria? Mitochondria has its own mechanism of depleting its own deuterium in order to function. So if whatever mechanism you want to use, I don't know whether or not they work. Some people claim they do. Some people say it's pointless. I just want to reassure people that whatever it is that you do, if you want to decrease your own deuterium, etc., fine. If it works for you, great. If it gives you more energy, fine. But the mitochondria itself actually depletes its own deuterium in order to make itself work properly. So it has its own mechanism.
Got it. Okay. All right, cool. Thanks. I'm glad I got to sneak that one in there. I think I've gotten your take on that. And I know you know a lot about mitochondrial function and metabolic disease and all this kind of stuff. So there we go. I got it in, and I'll save the other 49 questions for next time. Dude, thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to seeing you again, and keep me on your list for future journeys. As you know, I've been putting that in your ear for some time now. And when we're able to travel safely, I look forward to hanging out with you again.
Yes, that would be perfect. But I know it's not going to be in a 10,000 person crowd anymore.
Yeah, I know. Right, exactly. All right, Ted. Well, thanks so much, man. I appreciate you coming on, and we'll do it again soon.
Take care, Luke.
The fact that you made it to the end of this episode indicates to me that you are truly committed to expanding your consciousness and understanding of life and the world. And for that, I must express my gratitude and a humble bow to you. You are indeed a seeker and a finder. Sunday, we'll publish a bonus rebroadcast episode of my recent appearance on the podcast, Get Over Yourself, which was an incredible conversation. Then Tuesday, we'll be back to our regular programming with one of my all-time favorite guests, my friend, Daniel Vitalis, where we talk about the failure of fake food and modern medicine and how to reclaim your health with nature's wisdom. As I mentioned in the intro, if you want to check out Blue Cannatine, Dr. Ted's product, I highly recommend it. In fact, if you could see me right now, my entire mouth is bright blue. Luckily, no one can see me because I would look kind of strange at the moment. Sort of looks like I'm missing 3 or 4 teeth on the right-hand upper side. But the Blue Cannatine is fantastic for brain function. You can find that at troscriptions.com. That's TROSCRIPTIONS. Troscriptions.com. Once you get there, use the code Luke5 to save 5% off. I've got an event coming up in August. That's August 14th through 21st. I will be at the Healing Power of Energy Retreat at my favorite place in the entire universe called Cuixmala in Mexico. There, I will be joined by former podcast guest, Dr. Rashid Buttar, which did a great episode recently on the coronavirus situation, scandal, and also Dr. Jerry, the gentleman behind the Rasha technology. I'll also be joined there by Dr. Robert Slovak, who's an expert on all things water and deuterium depletion. I will be live streaming and recording that entire week in August, so you can definitely look forward to that. And you can join me there with those guests at Cuixmala by going to lukestory.com/events. You'll also find updates on my Health Optimization Summit appearance in London, for which the date is pending at this moment. So again, that's lukestory.com/events. Now is the time where I like to thank our sponsors, because honestly, without you as a listener and our sponsors to back this show, I'd be doing something else for a living. It takes a lot of time and energy to produce this show. I do it as a labor of love, but there are also bills to pay, and our sponsors pay those bills. And I'm so grateful to them. I'm so fortunate to be able to work with brands that I truly respect, brands that have integrity, that make products that actually work, that treat their customers with kindness, fairness, and overall just produce products that really upgrade your health. Now, that being said, you can always find all of the sponsors here at lukestory.com/store, but let's break them down. First, I'm happy to onboard our newest sponsor, Surthrival. And if you've heard the episodes with Daniel Vitalis, it's kind of funny that he owns that company, yet barely promotes it. He's just not a salesy, cheesy guy. So it's my job now to promote it for Daniel. So if you like Daniel Vitalis' appearance on the show and his work in general, I've been a huge fan of Surthrival and Daniel's work forever. I'd love for you to get over to surthrival.com, where you can use the code STYLE10 to save 10% off. That's surthrival.com. Check out the pine pollen for hormone function, the elk antler extract for recovery, the colostrum for everything, including immunity. I use so many of their products all the time. That is surthrival.com. Then we've got Osea. You can go to oseamalibu.com/The Lifestylist, where you will save $10 off your first purchase of $50 or more. Osea makes some fantastic, completely natural, very high-end skin and personal care products. That's Osea Malibu. OSEA Malibu. OseaMalibu.com/The Lifestylist. And last, but certainly not least, my favorite bee products in the freaking world. That's beekeepersnaturals.com. You can get your bee products over there for 15% off using the code LIFESTYLIST. That's beekeepersnaturals.com. Absolutely incredible, unparalleled bee products like propolis, bee pollen, honey, everything you can imagine that those amazing little creatures make. Completely organic, glyphosate-free, absolutely sustainable. They are doing wonders in the world of bees, both for the environment and your health. Beekeepersnaturals.com. See what I mean? Aren't those brands just badass? That's the cool thing about having a podcast. You can support brands that are ethical to their employees and customers and to the environment, the planet, animals. Everyone wins, and you even get discount codes. And I get to keep making this podcast and talk to people like Dr. Ted. I mean, like, what a freaking life, dude. As crazy as the world is right now, and with so many people suffering for so many different reasons, which I have shows about all those reasons coming out. Don't worry. Some people have commented that I don't seem to be, commenting on current events. And trust me, I'm very thoughtful about what I say and when, and also about whom I interview and how. So things are in the works when it comes to current events and social upheaval, etc. Fret not, my friends. I'm aware that the world is seemingly falling apart before our eyes. However, due to the fact that I get to have conversations with brainiac, heart-centered people like Dr. Ted, I'm just so grateful that at this time in history, the job that I happen to have is one of reporting on the good news largely in the world and helping to amplify positivity in the face of such shadow. So with that, my friends, I will bid you a farewell. And don't forget, we've got a bunch more podcasts coming your way. This Sunday, a guest appearance on a podcast that I did recently called Get Over Yourself. And back on Tuesday with Daniel Vitalis, the man behind Sir Thrival. Thank you so much for listening. And if you feel called and so inclined, please do yourself, the world, and me a favor and share this episode with a friend.